That's sensitive to yourself for once in your life.
I say be yourself.
You always say that. Look what happened the last time.
Exactly.
I had a panic attack.
Can you check the videos on your screen? That's right.
Yup.
Yeah, looks like we're good.
We're good? Awesome, thank you. Now turn it off. We don't want feedback. All right, so that's you guys.
Suddenly they were mesmerized.
By their relationships.
I know.
If they're high enough intelligence,
Very small child.
what's the challenge?
Oh, someone check for me.
Someone took their face and some crazy ass jets. I just picture a chimp in a suit. Well, I might be. I'm just a simple chimpanzee from the jungles of Rwanda. I understand your fancy legalese, but all I know is the name tastes good.
Okay. It's time. Hello. Welcome to the Hatchery. Just so you know what we're about, and we kind of overlap with them a little. We, in terms of like, well, speak free. We're a workspace for writers, and we're 24/7, all kinds of writers, and we just provide the things that you need to get writing. So that's us. If you want to stay afterwards, we give you tours, and we have loads of events like this if you want to sign up for the music.
It's a really cool place.
It's a really cool place. Speaking of really cool things, Paul is really cool. Paul Guyot, it sounds like Rio. I know. And then I'm told to say that Geoffrey's okay.
I am just a.
Yeah. And I'm not as qualified to introduce them as they are to introduce themselves. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Paul and Geoff.
Thank you.
This is your idea, so.
This is my idea. Yeah, this whole thing started on Twitter. Jeff and I are fairly active on Twitter. I was very anti-social media. I think actually still am. Until I was on a show called Leverage, where we were required to get Twitter accounts and interact with the fans, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, this is the most ridiculous thing. I don't care that, you know, Barack Obama had a Denver omelet this morning, and why does anyone read Twitter? And now 9,500 tweets later. Yeah. Gotcha. So it started from, you know, we follow a lot of screenwriters. Screenwriters follow us. A lot of people, aspiring writers, people want to write, learning to write, writing in their spare time, follow us. And I started seeing all this stuff about these we'll just call them people. These people who are charging lots of money to people like you for the secrets of breaking into business and television writing and screenwriting. And I you know, these people tweet say, oh, I just took this online course and it was only $195, and I signed up for ScriptFest and it's only $750. And I started looking up who these people were that were charging this money, and none of them were doing it. None of them, like literally none of them, were able to earn a living doing what they were teaching you how to do. And I guarantee you, it's not like an academic thing, which is a whole separate thing. If you're a professor and you go and teach, it's a whole different thing. These are people that are claiming, I know how to do this, so I will charge you money to teach you, yet they can't find employment doing it. And it just started to bother me, and I started ranting on Twitter, and Jeff joined in.
Enjoy your rest so much.
So then it became this, you know, quest of that, we want to start giving away this information free, because if you look at the actual working screenwriter, especially on Twitter, you look at the Jeff Liebers and Eric Heisers and Ryan Koppelmans and everybody, they'll tell you anything you want for free. Brian Koppelman, if you guys don't follow him, he's part of Koppelman and Levine, who wrote Rounders and a bunch of other stuff. He has these vines called 6-second screenwriting lessons, and he's got like over 250 of them, I think, at this point. 6 seconds he talks to you. You watch all those, and you will get more out of that than taking 5 Robert McKee courses, I guarantee you. And so that's how this was born out of. So it was just this thing that, and the hatchery and Guyot here, we found this amazing place, and they were really supportive to have us come in and do, and hopefully this is the first of many.
Perfect story.
And yeah, we want to take it. I've already been contacted by a guy. A shout out to Fat Cyclist on Twitter, who wants us to come to Utah. Yeah, right? The screenwriting capital of America. So yeah, combine a little cycling, eating, screenwriting stuff right there somehow. But you go ahead and tell them who you are.
I'm a working writer. I started a few years ago. I've been lucky enough to get on a bunch of good shows, some of which have been with Paul, Leverage, and currently the Librarians. I write animation, I write comics. I pretty much say yes to anyone who would pay for a long time, which I, by the way, recommend is rule 1, at least for a while.
Sorry.
And I've been lucky enough to be around really talented writers who.
Wait, we have to start all over.
I'm sorry.
I've been lucky enough.
Okay, so this thing started
On Twitter. You heard on Twitter.
No.
Damn it.
Sorry.
Yeah, so, and I found that the ones that were the best at it tended to be the most generous with their advice that actually worked. And when Paul started erupting all over frickin' Twitter, I'm evil. I get sucked into that stuff really fast. If somebody's imparting crappy info that I know is false, and they're being, it just tweaks me. I'm kind of the guy who would stand up in the back and go, can I just ask just one question? Qualifications? Qualifications at all, and you see people so desperate, so hungry to do this, and they're just, he's being nice. It's odd that I'm going to be the mean one now. They're parasitic, right? They depend on the fact that you want something so much, and then they charge you whatever they think they can get away with to tell you stuff that doesn't work, because most of it, frankly, doesn't work. Whether
or it works in certain contexts that they leave out.
Very narrow context, and so it was a sort of weird dovetail with Paul's huge fire about this. I just became the smaller light near the sun of Paul's rage. And here we are, and really we hope to talk less about ourselves. Our qualifications are he has a thick freaking resume, I have a thickening resume, and hopefully you guys have the kind of questions that can make this sort of thing fantastic, because it shouldn't be about us, it should be about things that you think you've been told. Is this bullshit? Is this not bullshit? What about X? What about Y? What do you do? All of that.
Yeah, that's what in talking to people that I know that have paid for, going to these seminars and these pitch fests and these different things, and I'll talk to them, and sometimes they get stuff out of it, but a lot of times they'll come away like, yeah, it was great, and I learned this and this, but no one really ever talked about this. And so why we wanted to make this first one strictly like a Q&A, and it's you guys in here and people on Twitter and whoever, like really poor souls are actually sitting watching this right now. Ask anything you want, whether it's about business, whether it's about craft, whether it's about screenwriting, or it's specific to television. The thing that's great about Jeff, he does everything. He's like a 5-tool player. He writes comics, he writes novels, he writes short stories. And I'm not saying he just writes them. He gets paid to do it. He does television. He's
Features scared the shit out of me. All alone.
He's a Renaissance man. So between the two of us, we feel like we've done the things, and we've been around long enough that we know a lot more than you know, the guy that sold a spec feature that got made into a movie in 1989 and now makes his living charging people money, you know, calling himself a screenwriter, or somebody that writes a book about a cat, and, you know, and you go and check the resume and it's like, oh, you know, and because here's the thing about Hollywood, the first little dirty secret I'll give away. You get a movie made in Hollywood as a writer, it's pretty tough to get kicked out of the club. If you do your job, you can get one movie made and you can make a living for 20 years off of that if you're good at what you do. So the guys that go and get one movie made and then suddenly nobody's hiring them 2 years after to write any screenplays, you should think about that before you give them money 15 years after that when they're saying, hey, I'm a Hollywood screenwriter, I can tell you guys how it works.
Unless their name is Harper Lee, right? Unless that movie has some amazing work of genius and they're like, I dropped the mic with that one, I don't need to do it. Which never happens, so.
Yeah.
So
this is Harper Lee excluded.
I love you, Harper Lee.
So
yeah, I mean, we'll just throw it open here, and you are the first one.
I'm so lucky.
Yeah.
I'm very curious. This is fantastic. I want to thank you for coming and giving away for free and all that stuff. I have a question for both of you. How did you get your first job, and what was it?
Great. The question is, how did we get our first job, Geoffrey?
there's two answers to that. One is a friend of mine told me that the Disney Corporation was looking for people who could draw and write. This was many years ago to pitch some stuff because they liked people to be a one-stop shop. So I did that and proceeded to be in development with Disney for that next year. It makes it sound easy, but it was fairly difficult. But they didn't pay me a dime, and then they didn't make the show, and I was very upset with myself. But the other way is I was asked to partner with a young lady named Courtney Parker, who had a window. She had I guess an in at the Dick Wolf Company. She had worked there as a researcher and could call them up, and she said, "Hey, I got this great idea for a TV pilot that's based on something they own, and they're willing to hear it from me. But the sad thing is I write romantic comedy. I don't do crime." And I'm like, "What?" So it's like, "Why are you telling me this?" You know? And she says, "Well, I've heard you write crime." I'm like, "I've been employed to write crime, yeah, but yes, I do write crime." And my wife's like, "Why are you trying to talk yourself out of work?" Basically, long story short, she told me this amazing idea. And I was like, "Holy crap, I wish I thought of that. What do you want me for? You can walk this in. Just this is literally an elevator pitch. Just go pitch this freaking thing." She's like, "I feel more comfortable having a script, and the window is so short. You know, let me get someone who's more adept at this. I'll function more as an editor-in-chief. It's my idea. You'll do it, and I'll correct your work if I feel it needs it." I want to work. How dare you? But we walked it in. They read it because she did have this connect, and then they promptly said, "We're never doing this show." However, would you guys be interested in a staff position on criminal intent as a team? And I'm like, "Yeah, please, I'm almost broke." And she's like, "I don't know." And I was like, "Are you trying to have me kill you? What? Say yes, woman!" You know, but she had all these other things going on. It was actually paid time because when you're a writer team, you're paid as if you're a single individual. And it would actually be a loss of money for her. She was a single mom. She had a lot of concerns, which her agent promptly told her, "Are you insane? Say yes!" So that was it. That was our first job. And we did 20 weeks and we were promptly asked to not do 20 more. So that was my first job.
My first paid screenwriting gig, it's kind of a tie. I was hired to do a freelance episode for a show called Snoops.
Yeah.
Paul Marshall, Gina Gershon, female private eyes who tended to lick whipped cream off each other during Snoops week. David Kelly. Yeah. It was actually notes we got. They did it in the November sweeps, and then in February sweeps, the writer's room got the note. You need a scene where they lick whipped cream off each other.
No.
That was the very first check I ever received, and that was born out of the person that I was involved with at that time. I was making my living as a stand-in. I had a wonderful career as a professional stand-in for way too many years. And I was just writing my stuff. And again, I have a whole rant too about the whole how do you get an agent thing. Like, an agent will never help you get your first job ever. So you do not need an agent. Never worry about getting an agent. They come to you. That's a whole nother thing. Anyways, the person I was involved with at the time had got somebody that she was working with to read a spec script of mine that went to another person who was involved in Snoops, and they liked my writing and called me in for a meeting, and I pitched a couple of story ideas, and I got hired. And that was literally, it was like a who you know connection, but it came down to the writing. My first staff job in television was a show called Felicity.
Yeah.
That I had a brand new agent at the time. It was my first agent, and I was happy I had an agent, and I didn't know until later that he was even more happy to have a client. And again, he was doing nothing for me, and a guy I knew was on an airplane with a guy named J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams was talking about, got the show Felicity, I got to hire a new writer. He said, oh, I got this guy now, he got this really great NYPD Blue spec, like the perfect spec for Felicity. And said, you should read it. JJ read it on the plane, landed, drove to the Hotel Mondrian, met Matt Reeves there, called my agent. They called me and said, JJ and Matt want to meet you right now. I got in my car and I drove to the hotel, and I met with JJ and Matt for about 45 minutes. And they hired me, and again, it was based off a spec script that I had written that was an NYPD Blue, had nothing to do with Felicity, and I got in a meeting and talked to them and pretended I knew more about the show than I did. And
Always love.
yeah, and so I was driving back to my little apartment, and my agent called me, and I couldn't understand him. He was so excited. And he's like, and so I figured that he meant I had been hired, and JJ wanted me to start right then. And I literally didn't even make it back to my apartment. I had to turn my car around and drive down to Alwyn Hills or wherever it was, and I went to work on Felicity, and that was my first job. So both of my first gigs, it was totally a connection of who I knew, and then I had to have the script that they liked enough to get me into the meeting. Michael Ramsey, everyone.
Okay.
On that, with writing specs and having things ready, do you feel as though it's smart to just keep working on your own specs, keep working on your own specs, whatever they may be, while looking for paid work? Does that make sense?
Short answer is hell yeah.
Okay.
Always be right. Always be right.
ABW.
Yeah, AB script, ABS.
ABW.
The reason is, one, the business changes. So like, you'll go through a phase where everybody wants to only see original work, only your own pilot. They want to see any specs for somebody else. And then, for no reason at all, some year, you'll suddenly not have the spec you need because they decided what they really want to see is how well you write somebody else's thing. So, and also it's good for the chops. Your first job's going to be working on somebody else's show. You're not going to be one of those, it's very unlikely to be one of those lucky few who their first thing they sell puts them on the air and they're in the showrunner. You can count those people, you know? So you're gonna be writing for somebody else. It's good to keep your chops finding another voice, writing in somebody else's voice, or trying to write, while still being your original self, obviously, because they want your flavor, but it's gotta be in their tone of voice. So I would, yeah, always be writing, always be writing, always be writing.
I disagree with Jeff, but yes, you should always be right.
Bastards. Got me again.
Would you think that in general, both your beginnings seem to have had their roots and connections and people you knew? Would you say in general that's basically, that's what one could expect? Or are there other avenues that occasionally work out?
Here's the
Don't have
thing.
that magic person.
I think it's 99.5% the right connection to get that first job. There are the stories that happen. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and they put their thing up on YouTube, and suddenly, you know, these guys now have had a show on for 10 years and they're millionaires and all that. So everybody thinks, oh, I'll do that because that's what works. No, that worked for one person, one time. You know, it's in television writing. I know the vast majority of writers that have broken in have been writers' assistants.
Yeah.
sometimes script coordinators. But it's again, that's a connection, you know, on Leverage, on Librarians, on Judging Amy, I'm running enough shows that I worked on. The writer's assistant, which is basically a PA gig, you know, got the freelance script. They're on most all television shows, the WGA requires the shows to give out a certain number of freelance episodes every year. Well, the showrunners, you know, they're not really into that. It's their show, and they want to, you know, make sure that they trust the writers and know the writers. And instead of reading, you know, when you're trying to produce a television show, you don't have time to do anything, let alone read a whole bunch of samples of writing to find a freelancer that you can give away an episode to.
That you're gonna rewrite anyway, because probably. Yeah.
So you have the writer's assistant in the room there, who you've worked with that whole season and maybe longer, who's done everything you've asked for them, and not only gotten you into coffee and the lunch orders, but done the research and taken all the notes in the writer's room. And, you know, if they've done it right, they busted their butt. And most every writer's assistant is an aspiring writer, and so you read their spec, and if they are even decent, they don't even, that's the thing, if you get the job as a writer's assistant, you don't even have to be as good as the person who doesn't have the job. Because they just want to see, like, okay, they can form sentences and they can, you know, write in the proper structure. I can take this and I can rewrite it into a thing. And that's sort of the golden secret to getting in this business. It's not about getting an agent. It's not about putting your own stuff on YouTube. It's not about all that. It's go to work for someone else and get that freelance.
So we'll say a yes and to that, which is, yeah, it is largely a connection-based industry on every level, but it isn't like make sure you went to the right. You don't need to go to Harvard. That barista that you talk to a lot may be that connection. It's more a matter of keeping yourself writing and letting people know that you're serious about it. When people ask you what you are, you say, "What do you do?" "I'm a writer." You know, "What do you write?" "I write crime. I write sci-fi." Well, you like no thought process. That's just your boom. You know, because the lady who worked at the Wolf's Company, I didn't know her as a writer. She had hired an artist friend of mine who I'd done scup work for on a project that she hired him for, and he had told her, "Oh, my boy writes, you know, like, duh, like throw a cat, you know, you're gonna get somebody who writes scripts in this town." But
we're not advocating throwing cats.
Gently toss. But the point being is that my artist friend told a client of his that his buddy was a writer, and in theory she was desperate enough at that point to give me a tumble. So that was a connection-based thing, but on the other side of that, the short stories I sold, which made me no money, barely paid my rent, the couple of comics I'd done for free, but the audience didn't know that, they just saw a comic book written by Jeff, adds to my resume. So when she said, "What have you done?" Right, you know, and it looks so great on paper. And I'm thinking, wow, I would need $50 on that. She's really impressed. You know, do I tell her? No, you know. So yes, so it is somewhat connection based in that sense. But if you don't have the arsenal when the door opens, so what?
Yeah, the connection gets you in, but you gotta have the ability. And that goes back to what Jeff was just saying, back to the earlier question about, you know, do you write specs? Do you write original stuff? And it used to be you had to write a spec of another show. Like I wrote a Dawson. Here's what I wrote before I ever got paid to write television: an NYPD Blue spec, a Dawson's Creek spec, a News Radio spec, a Just Shoot Me spec. Yeah, I thought I wanted to be a comedy writer for a while. There's a couple others in there. An X-Files spec, and it's really changed now with the advent of cable television and the way storytelling has changed in television, to where I personally don't know of many showrunners left that want to read specs of other shows.
Right.
I think it's almost all original material, because I think they finally realized that if you're a good writer, you can mimic the showrunner's voice. If you can, you know, you can do that, then you got those skills. But the thing is, what Jeff was saying that I want to go to is now, what showrunners do now that they didn't do 15 years ago is they will read short stories. They will read plays. You know, there's people I know on like Hart Hanson's big giant showrunner, Bones and Backstrom and stuff, you know, loves reading short stories, loves reading plays. There's other showrunners that are the same way, that it's not just, you know, oh, I gotta write a pilot, you know, okay, I wrote my original pilot, I don't have another idea for original pilot, what am I gonna do? You can just be writing.
Yeah.
If you can never write too much.
We were talking about this before, which is our job is storytelling. The format is screenwriting. So you can tell a good story and hold people. Then all you really need to learn is what's the current format du jour, right? You can look at a script from 1980 and say, oh, the script is not a modern TV show. Any script, because the format is slightly different. It also goes through a metamorphosis of some sort, depending on how many acts we now need to squeeze commercials in, or things like that. But yeah, but the personal connection thing can be oversold as well, right? I'm sure either you are or know a person who's constantly trying to meet a movie star at the gym, or go into the right parties where they can hand off a script.
And that's not the connection to
That's
what
not
we're
what it
talking
is.
about. It's like Jeff's connection with Courtney. I mean, that was the connection that got you into the business.
Right.
But it wasn't, oh, I sought out, I networked and you know, did all that. Because that's another thing. I don't know. I have yet to meet someone who told me a story. It's like, hey, yeah, I have a writing career now because I went and networked at this party and did this thing or paid $50 to go to this. If maybe it works. I'm just telling you, I've been getting paid to write since 1999, and I have not met anyone who said that they have gotten their career from paying to go to a scriptapalooza or a script fest or a networking party or you know, I read this thing. The other thing, let's go, man. The other thing.
I'm just shitty at snoozing.
It's one of the other things too, this whole thing about, you know, buy my online class and read my book I wrote and do all this is, yeah, look, there's legitimate stuff, structurally speaking, technically speaking, with McKee and Snyder and Field and all that. But there's two things that I think destroy the screenwriter more than help them with all that. And the first one is, you got 300 people taking the same class, and they go off and they write, you're getting 300 of the exact same scripts, okay? And there are so many writers out there. You are competing against so many other people right now. The only way is for your stuff to stand out. And if you're gonna write the exact same thing structurally, I'm not talking about the same idea, but if you're writing, you know, if you just came back, well, I read Blake Snyder's book and I took McKee's class and I did this and so did, you know, 200 other people, your scripts are gonna look exactly the same. You better be the best goddamn writer on the planet to stand out from those other people, right? Or you can write your own thing, and you cannot, you know, say, okay, wait, Blake says on page 43, the guy has to do this, so I can do that. Because here's the thing, in McKee's class, and I've made a point, like I'm not somebody that talks about, like I will not bash something without having knowledge of it. Like I think Harlan Ellison says, you're not entitled to your opinion, you're entitled to your informed opinion. And so, you know, I've spent some time studying McKee and all that stuff and everything, so I know what I speak when I say, you know, when you hear Akiva Goldman or somebody say, oh, McKee's class was great, you know, Billy Ray, I got so much out of McKee's class. Those guys were already great freaking writers before they took McKee's class, and it just made them look at structure in a different way. And the problem with Snyder, McKee, and Myers and all these people, you know, and God bless them all, they're all making a living and great. But I'm just saying you don't need to pay them to get to the same place you can get by paying them. And it's, the thing is they're teaching forensics, okay? They're teaching math. They are looking at something, they are putting up, you know, McKee's thing, you know, broadcast news in Chinatown and Ordinary People and Kramer versus Kramer and Rocky, and here's why all the structures are identical even though they're completely different and all this stuff. He's taking something that was already created and he's telling you, oh, this is why it worked. How does that help you with the blank page?
Also, it's not a science. It's an art.
It's not. You have to come at it from imagination first. You have to come at it from creativity first. If you try to come at it from an analytical standpoint, you will fail. And I'm not saying you won't get paid to write. We both know writers that are being paid that are strictly analytical writers, and they suck. Okay? They're getting paid, but they suck. And if you want to be good, and to be good, if you're good, then you have a longer career than the guys and girls that suck, is you have to come at it. It's art. I mean, it's screenwriting's not art like art's art. I mean, screenwriting is
Commercial.
more of that craft blueprint kind of thing, because it's a screenplay is nothing until somebody makes it into something. But you still have to come at it like an artist. You have to come at it from a creative standpoint and an imagination standpoint and a whimsical standpoint. If you come at it, if you are sitting down with a blank page going, okay, I've got to have my opening do this, and I have to have by page 10 this, and by page 43 the second plot point of the first act, and you're gonna fail. And that's what I don't see. That's what I see being taught by all these different gurus. And it's like, okay, if you know how to do it, then maybe you can get something out of them. But as much as Billy Ray says, oh man, Robert McKee was blew my mind, it was so great. I don't think if Billy Ray had taken Robert McKee's class when Billy Ray was just starting out and had only written 2 or 3 crappy screenplays, he would have ended up being Billy Ray. He became Billy Ray because he was just writing from his ass. He was just like, I gotta write, I'm a writer, I just have these stories to tell, I'm gonna tell these stories. And then once he was like a 7-figure a year screenwriter and stuff, he took McKee's class and was like, oh, okay, I get what he's saying there.
That's neat. Yeah. But yeah, it's what is it?
I'm sorry.
What does he say? Goldman says nobody knows anything. Believe me, if there was an actual formula, we would all be out of work. Because they would create an algorithm and program a rudimentary AI to write the next romance, to write the next sci-fi. They would just program in what do we need, what demo, go write machine. Trust me, we would all be out of work.
Let me take, because we're doing the Twitter, YouTube questions too, before we come back to, is there anyone from there?
Yes.
Yes, give us a question from the internet.
All right,
Watch
this
it,
is from Angelic Catastrophe.
Sure.
What kind of degree path would you recommend a potential screenwriter
You take
to accomplish?
I know your answer is none.
You don't need a degree to be a screenwriter. You don't need to take a single class to be a screenwriter. You don't even need to read a book, really, to be a screenwriter. You just need to be able to tell a good you need to be able to tell a good story to be a professional screenwriter. There's a lot of shitty stories. Right? You should be able to, but it's not a requirement. No, you don't need, there's no degree that gets you a job writing for a TV show.
What about a degree that maybe the skills will help you?
Anything you can learn, I hate to say this because I actually went to an arts college, but don't look it up, I am not hurting that. The thing is that everything you can learn about writing a screenplay, well, the things that you can learn from other people about writing a screenplay, you get in the first 10 pages of a Sid Field book. The whole rest of the book is worthless because the first part is all format. The rest of it is place character development point X at page 142 and do this, make sure you put in a little doggy for the guy that says, all of that is just the fluffy, crazy filler that fills up the rest of the book. The only thing you need to know to write a screenplay is the format of the screenplay and how the story itself.
What I would say to the Gene, what kind of degree you need to be a screenwriter is, it's not even so much that you don't need a degree. My thing is, where are you getting a degree from? Meaning, who's teaching? I don't want to waste time with it, but a really, quick story. I was on Judging Amy. This was like 2003 or 4. And Barbara Hall was the showrunner of that. Yeah, she's awesome. She was very open to helping young writers, and she even had a thing. There was the guy, if anyone's going to go to college, apparently University of Oklahoma, which, believe it or not, has an amazing screenwriting program, because the guy who teaches it there gets it, and he interacts with Hollywood, and instead of going and saying, here's how you should do it, folks, he takes his class, and they come to LA, and they go, and they meet people like Barbara Hall, and they do things, or the writers will go to Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma, and talk to his classes and stuff. But anyway, so she was very encouraging of us to help aspiring writers. And I got an email from a guy that was about to get his degree in screenwriting from the University of Florida. Pretty major university, right? And I said, oh, great. And he said, yeah, would you read my Buffy the Vampire spec? It's my final project, thesis, whatever, to get his final grade to get the screenwriting degree. And I said, I would be happy to. Now, again, this is 2003, I think. Back then, 1 hour television was written in 4 acts. Because of the commercial breaks, and most scripts were anywhere from 50, 55 pages to 65 pages. And so this guy sends me his Buffy spec. It's 41 pages long and it has 6 acts. And I was like, oh, and I felt so bad, and I contacted the guy. I mean, I called him. I felt so bad I didn't want to email him. And I called him from my office and I said, hey, listen, man, you know, you actually got some great dialogue in here, you got, you know, but your format, you've got to learn the proper format. And he said, well, that's what they're teaching us. He was in his 4th year of this screenwriting program at the University of Florida, about to get his degree in screenwriting so he could come to LA as a screenwriter, and his 1-hour television specs were 41 pages and 6 acts. And the guy teaching this, the academic with the professor, you know, with the teaching degree and the master's, is teaching them this is the proper form. So that's why I have an issue with, you know, what kind of degree I should get. It all comes down to who you're listening to and who you're learning from. If people know what they're talking about, then great, get a degree from them. If they don't, you know, then you're in trouble.
If you can find a college though that is turning out successful screenwriters, I want to hear about it, because I've never heard of that college.
Yeah.
Can anyone?
When you talk to like the NYU film department, the USC, you know, USC's got the big fancy golden screenwriting program. And again, there are certainly people that are successful coming out of that school of screenwriters, but you know what? Most of them is because their dads are entertainment lawyers, or they got the writing assistant job when they got out of their USC program, and it's like nobody is walking in, unless you're part of the Harvard Mafia at Simpsons, nobody is walking in with a degree from anywhere saying, where's my career?
That's actually a good thing. Like on Leverage, I was sitting around and basically everybody there was a freaking physicist or mathematician or went to Harvard or, you know, something. And I went to some little podunk, you know, salon college. And I was sitting there and I was kind of feeling like, I'm marketing here, you know. And the boss was like, yeah, but they all have all these degrees and you're still sitting here at the table with them.
Yeah, that was a big moment for you.
It was a significant moment because it just really reshaped my thinking about what it is we do. I think of us well before Shonda. I love you, Shonda, but I was saying this before you. We are all gladiators, okay? There's an arena, and it doesn't matter where you got your armor or how you train your sword, how you sharpen your sword. If you bring in 2 swords, or some Star Trek fan was bringing a back left, you can make that work. That's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, it's 2 or 3 people enter and 1 or 2 people walk out. It doesn't matter where you went to freaking school, right? And
Tell good stories.
You know, tell good stories. You know how to do it.
There's a leather-clad arm on the back.
It's not a Captain America. God
Wait,
bless you.
wait. That might be pleather.
Yes, how important do you guys think it is, or from what you've seen currently, to have a very narrow genre focused portfolio? Like write sci-fi, or write fantasy, or crime, or do you have to pick one?
You don't have to.
Okay, before you answer, I think what we want to do is everybody raise your hand so we can get you in order. So who's got questions?
Oops.
Yeah, I'll take pictures of everyone.
I will take this right now.
Oh my God.
We'll get to everybody, don't worry. I just want to make sure that there's not someone who's away.
We're gonna be here till 4
Can I
o'clock.
answer while you're
Let's answer
Really fast.
But repeat the question for the.
The question was, do you have to limit yourself to a particular set of genres or one genre? Or
Was that the question?
yeah.
Okay.
And the short answer to that is no. I am limited by what occurs to me. So the odds of me writing with Harry and Sally are extremely remote, unless Sally has an Uzi and Harry's from outer space. But as Paul pointed out at the very beginning, he wrote a news radio spec. He was all over the map, from Judging Amy to frankly to Leverage. I mean, that you almost couldn't get more opposing kinds of shows. I write cartoons. I write comics. I try to write what occurs to me. I mean, in the sense of the things that are natural. What does John say? Know your swing. It's at least getting in. It's good to know your swing, because that means know what you're excellent at, right? Know what is a fat, slow pitch right across the plate, because the audience, your potential employers, don't know anything about you. So if you go, well, you know, I write some stuff. I like that one, and then they throw you that just beautiful, slow, genre-related pits and you're like, it's right in my wheelhouse, and you destroy it, they'll think you're a genius. They're like, we gotta have you. This came so naturally to you. You are a machine for this kind of thing. Now, at some point, I've met writers where that starts to chafe, right? You'll get in 5 years, 6 years, luckily, right? You're happy, oh my God, I got a 5-year career, wow, but at some point, some people want to branch out, and that's why you are always writing, right? You can always experiment on your own time. It's good to know your swing when you're trying to get a gig, because it means you can drop into the chair and fly that helicopter.
That's what, and I think another version of that same answer, because I agree with him, is especially starting out like this, is write what you're passionate about, write what you want to see, write what you want to write. Don't try to write to the marketplace. That is disaster. That is death.
Yeah.
Just write what you love. If your narrow thing is just, gargoyle-laden sci-fi, with an erotic twist, then you write the hell out of that. And you write 2 or 3 specs in that world and a short story and all that, and you didn't, because I'm the last guy in the world that should be writing on Librarians right now. I am not a genre guy at all. I'm not part of the geek thing. I don't know mythology at all. I wish I were. But John Rogers hired me to write Librarians and co-executive produce it because I worked for him on Leverage, and he knew I know character, I know story. I can, I sit in the room, John's been out for the first couple months of this, and I've been running our writer's room. And, technically I'm the highest level writer in the room and the co-executive producer, and I'm running the room. I let these guys drive it because they know the genre better than I do. And then what I do is I let them go and they talk about story and stuff, and then I just shape it and mold it into, okay, look, it still has to be a story. It still has to, we've got to hit these, character beats here, and it has to make sense this way. And
that leads me to a thing about, because I am dyed-in-the-wool genre writer. I mean, most of my stuff's sci-fi, fantasy, whatever. But especially when you're writing for television, all that stuff, and I love that stuff so much, but that stuff is just the wrapping paper, right? The magic dragon or the freaking spaceship or whatever. Firefly was not about a crew of people riding around in space, right? If you think it was about that, you missed the point. TV is about characters. People show up to see these people in their living rooms weekly, or you'll binge it like I just did with Daredevil because it was awesome. But it was awesome because of the characters, right? So if you are a genre writer, don't be lulled into the security, the sense of security of, I know how to do these aliens, oh, they're gonna love my world building on Mars or whatever. Nobody's gonna give a shit about that. They're gonna know that when I shoot Ripley in the face, I actually feel it. Right? And please don't shoot Ripley in the face.
you want to take another?
Yeah, so 1, my God.
Two.
And 2, we're gonna work back this way, and take another round picture. So you first.
Your thoughts on entering contests or what I call the network lotteries, those workshops. Do you have any thoughts on those, as well as the other part of the question?
I want to jump in first because mine's going to be short.
Okay. And then the blacklist. And if you got a high rating on the blacklist, how to best leverage that?
And my answer just got longer. All right, I'm not going to knock the blacklist. What the blacklist started out was awesome. Now it's a business. Okay, I have nothing against it, but I did do a test. I took a show that I almost got on the CW, and I submitted it to the blacklist, and I paid $50 to get it reviewed by someone. And they gave me all these wonderful reasons why it was this and that and this, all this other stuff. And I was like, yeah, but I was almost on the air with this thing. You might be wrong, And the moral to that is, everyone has an opinion, and the only opinion that matters is the person who's buying the thing. Okay, if you look up Heinlein's rules of writing on the web, they sort of apply to screenwriters. The most important one is don't edit unless someone's paying you to edit. Okay, but in terms of contests, I broke into prose, getting second prize in the Star Trek contest. So it's the question of the contest is, what do they promise you, and can they deliver it?
That's it.
Okay, and for the various programs that are around town, I got a friend who's in the Disney program. He's loving it. I've had friends at Warner's and writers on The Verge, and they loved it. So, and each program makes certain promises and certain claims about what you will get out of it. It's easy to track. Right? They say who their graduates are. Where are those graduates? If you have a program that places you, you know, we say, once you're done with this, you're going to be on Avengers or whatever, you know, whatever the current thing is. And then you look at that happen, then it's worth fighting to get into that program, I suppose. If the program does not do that, why would you bother? You know, how's that different than what you're already doing? You know, so in terms of contests, especially, I never entered a contest where I paid to enter the contest. I was told early on by a professional writer that did not even know me. I emailed him. I'm not even into mentioning a lot of things. Money flows to the artist. It should never flow away from the artist. Even your agent gets 10% of something you earn, but that's figured into your earning, right? And they're getting paid for doing something to help you get that job, in theory, or at least to negotiate once it's in the pocket. So if someone's asking you for $750 to do any contest, $100 to enter a contest, that's not a reading fee. I was a reader and I didn't get paid $150 for a script, right? I didn't get paid $8 per script. So where's all that rest of that money going? Not to the reader. So I hate to say contest organizers, but I'm not a fan. You know, I see a lot of writers who are mostly broke and can't spend that $100 or whatever bucks, but they spend it because they think it's gonna give them that little extra iota of control, which we ultimately don't have. You gotta embrace the fact that you don't have that control. Control is not right well. That's the only control you've got. So I am not a fan.
I think for, you know, and I know why people enter contests is to try to get that break, to get into, you know, to get the agent, to get the, and it's sort of, my answer is similar to my degree answer, is who's holding the contest, you know? Nichols, obviously legit, you know, go for it. Now, everyone hears these stories about White Squall and all these things, you know, I won the Nichols, or I finished quarterfinalist in the Nichols, and my movie got made, and you know what, that's great, okay? For every one of those, just know there's hundreds that got nothing.
Do the ratio.
You know, and yeah, every year Nichols has, well, do the math, 8 quarterfinalists, right? Every year there's 8 people that can claim quarterfinalists in Nichols. So the last 10 years, that'd be 80 people. Are they all employed as screenwriters? I would doubt it.
Or half of them employed as screenwriters.
Right. That said, enter it. You know, Nichols, Austin Heart of Film.
Anything
I'm kind of out after that. I mean,
Sundance.
Here's somebody said something to me once, and I've never forgotten it. They said, if you want to guarantee yourself an income in screenwriting, create a screenwriting contest.
It's not a joke.
There are so many out there, $40, $50, you know, and you think about it, they throw it up there, 100 people enter, that money's going in there, you know, and they say, hey, you'll be read by Hollywood agents. How do you know that that's not the guy's cousin who's in the mailroom at ICM? You know, it's like, but there are legit ones. You know, anything attached to a legit film festival like Austin, which is a fantastic film festival. Their whole television section's fantastic. Those contests enter. Nichols, you told me about one, Hilliard Blue Cat, Alley Cat, that you think that one's pretty legit. I have no knowledge of that one.
But that's a matter of you being really, really diligent about your research into the thing. And assume that most of them are trying to rook you for your money. Start there and then let them prove they're not guilty, right? Let the contest prove it's not guilty.
We were going the lady in the orange, then the guy with the beard named,
Ned Thorne.
Ned Thorne.
Ned Thorne's a superhero name, isn't it? Ned Thorne. Yes.
Captivating.
Getting a writer's assistant job.
I'm gonna have to defer to my partner here.
That's a tough question, and it's a tougher answer. It goes back to that connection thing. Again, I'll just tell you my experience with writers' assistants in rooms. Going back, I'll just go back to judging Amy. The writer's assistant there had worked with Barbara Hall as a PA in some capacity. So she knew him, show came on the air, needed a writer's assistant, hired him. Leverage, our writer's assistant, first part of that show, she was an assistant to a producer at Electric Entertainment, which is Dean Devlin's company that produced Leverage. So they started it, they needed a writer's assistant. she was in a position, she's like, oh, I'm a writer, I'd love to do it. Boom, you got the gig. The writer's assistant who followed her, where did Aaron come from?
I think that was a Chris Downey.
Okay, again, it was, that's right, because here's another connection story. The second writer's assistant on Leverage, who actually ended up being good enough at his job and good enough as a writer that he got a freelance script the final season. He got that gig because he was teaching one of the executive producer's kids how to play golf. That's how it
And
happened.
he turned out to be able to write his.
But that's the thing, that's how he got the job. Then he had to stay in the job by being really good at it. Then he had to show us his writing, and it had to be good enough that but he got himself a freelance script, and he's in the Writers Guild now. So I can't tell you how to get a writer's assistant gig other than going to things like this, meeting people like us, interacting on Twitter is a great thing.
Yeah.
Twitter is, I think, so much better than Facebook and anything else because you've got a lot of television and feature people on Twitter, and for the most part, we all interact with you guys. And you can, Jeff Lieber, who's the showrunner of NCIS New Orleans, that guy, he just almost weekly, I think, he has this thing. You got questions, I got answers. And he will just answer any question on Twitter for free. Eric has to drink a little before he starts talking. I love you, Eric. But it's like, you follow people on Twitter where I'm at FizzHog, 2 Z's, 2 G's. He's Game of Thorns.
Game of Thorns.
And you start following these people, it can be that much, create a relationship that way, I met somebody, I won't say any names, but somebody who I met through Twitter and asked me, hey, would you mind meeting me for coffee one morning just to pick your brain? It's like, sure.
Yeah.
Met perfectly fine, person, wasn't an axe murderer, met her in a public place. And,
Daytime.
And and she was great, and talked for a couple hours, and I actually ended up reading a couple of her things. And it's just, it sucks, but it's just who you know and what kind of connection you can make.
That's a hard one. I mean, yeah.
Just agree with me.
I do. I represent you.
Should we do anything from the internet, question-wise, or?
I want to get through this round first.
Okay.
Because y'all showed up.
Yeah, Ned, go ahead.
This is a little bit about, a little bit on the craft side, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of us in this room are struggling to write their first thing or their 10th thing or whatever. It's hard. And I always personally run into these things where I have a great idea, and I know that people are going to love it. It's freaking awesome. Except that I get 2/3 of the way through it, and everything starts to fall apart. It makes sense. I don't know. This can't happen. Do you have any just strategies?
That's a planning
push
issue.
past those logic holes that come up?
That's a story. I think that's a story issue that's common across the board.
I think it means you're a writer.
Yeah.
The question is what do you do craft-wise when you have something you think is a great idea and you're enthusiastic and you start writing it and then you hit that 2/3 point and suddenly the world falls in and you hate yourself and you hate the idea and you come up with a million excuses why it sucks and you shouldn't be writing it, right? Yeah,
that happens.
you're a writer, Ned.
Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
If it happens consistently, it's poor planning. Especially for screenplays, but it works for novels and really any structured story. What generally happens is the fun part is the open. That's what means you sit down to write. You get to get them all wrapped up in the middle of some craziness, right? And that's kind of fun because Hans in the corporate life or whatever. And then you got to do the unfun stuff of getting them out of that and making sure this particular moment occurs in exactly the right place, and then it's over. So you're on a downslope, right? So emotionally, it sounds crazy, but it's so common. So emotionally, you have less of a reason to keep at it, 1. 2, your world building is faulty. If that keeps happening, it's because you didn't build the foundation properly and you get to the point where the building's so high and you didn't put a leg under it and then starting at the top and you're like, holy shit, but it looks so great in my mind, and it's because you didn't take that extra week. We use, I never used to outline anything until I started working in TV. I would just go story, and it would gel for a long time, and then I would sit down and type, and then I'd edit, right? But you can't really do that in assembly line television, so I presume it's similar in movies. You have to outline to some degree. It's not fun, it's not sexy, it does suck some of the life out of this joy that we have when we're sitting down to write, but it does save you on page 148, right? Because in our case, we use note cards. You can literally pop the note card out and go, oh, I did track this, ends up here and it stalls, that something in Act 1 didn't happen that needed to happen for this to be justified or for this to whatever. It's almost always a structural flaw, from my experience. And if it's something you keep doing, then it's something about your process. Then you just need to look at that. You'll be surprised once you come at it with that fresh eye, how quickly that problem goes away.
I think it's a super common problem. I think if you don't have that problem, you should think about another career. Because I'm not kidding you, from everyone in this, from Ned Thorne, superhero, to, you know, who's my hero, Tony Gilroy. They have the same problem, and it's I talked about it. Hilliard has a podcast. A little shout out to Screenwriters Rant, great podcast. And I talked about this thing called the page 69 test, and that's originally a term from the novel world. The guy who wrote the Gutenberg Galaxy, his name's escaping me right now. Who? Thank you. Yes.
That's the rescue.
In that book, written in the 60s, really quick, he had this thing, like, he was talking about marketing and how we're influenced by advertising and all that. And if you want to know if you should buy a book or not, you should look at the cover, or read the jacket, or look at the author. You should open page 69, and if you like that page, buy the book. So that became a thing. So I, in my screenwriting career, turned that into a way to tell if you're a good writer or not without reading your entire screenplay. It's a little cheat I use, and I call it the page 69 test. To me, and this isn't for television, this is feature specs. Most of them are 100 to 120, 130 pages. So page 69 in a screenplay is when you are deep in the elephant grass. It is the muck. It is, you are late in Act 2, and it's what Jeff just said. It's all the fun opening stuff has already happened, and you got all the stuff at the end that you can't write yet because you haven't gotten through. And it's the worst part of writing. Whether you're writing a novel, a short story, you get into that elephant grass, and it's what separates the writers from the non-writers. And I'm going through it right now with a big feature I've been working on. And it's, you just have to push through it. It's sometimes, like Jeff's saying, maybe you go back and step back and look at it structurally and think I've got a flaw there, but I mean, this feature I'm writing right now, I don't want to get too into it, but it's something that I have recently been convincing myself over and over that it's garbage. And I'm not the writer to write it, and I'm terrible, and I suck. And yeah, and I know that it's just a neurotic writer thing, and it's because I'm at that point in the screenplay where it's really hard. It's like there's no more fun opening action sequences. There's no more, the denouement hasn't happened. You're just in that. You're trying to get from Act 2 to Act 3, and that's the hardest part of writing in a classic 3-act structure of any story.
So you must.
And that's yeah, I would not abandon it at all. I mean, it's funny, I think I tweeted this recently. There's a lot of writers that abandoned projects that had no idea how close they were to the end.
Right.
And you know what? It's just how I get through that personally is I will put something aside for a while and I'll work on other things and completely clear that out of my head. So when I come back to it, it's as fresh as I can come back to it. Because that's the thing, when you're working on something and you set it aside for a couple of days and you haven't done anything else, you come back to it, you're not helping yourself because you're still in it. You have to flush your system. And I will do that. I will sometimes write stuff that I know is never going to end up in the screenplay. This is how I got through this feature right now. I will write scenes that I know don't work, that are completely different, but it's just to get me to the next point.
Right.
And through doing that, like I wrote these, I was at this part of the script where I knew it wasn't working. I had not tied my stuff I'd set up in Act 1 to pay off well, and I just had to get through this 15-page bridge. And I wrote like 3 scenes that were really awful, and I knew weren't even, it's not that they were so bad they shouldn't be in the screenplay, it was that they just didn't have any business in the story. But I wrote them to just keep my instrument sharp and to keep going, and it helped. And to look at something, sometimes all you have to do is look at a scene from a 15-degree different angle. And so that's why I wrote these 3 scenes, and I was like, well, that was a waste of time. But then there was 2 lines of dialogue in one of the scenes that spurred something in me. And I was like, you know what, if I take that, if I put that back in that scene that happens before this scene, and I did that, and it changed the next scene, it changed the next scene, and suddenly I was rolling again.
Yeah.
And I got through it.
That's like the Heinlein rule, always finish what you write. It's not really a screenplay until you write fade out. It's not complete. If it's incomplete, it's not a screenplay. If you haven't finished it, it's not a novel. I'm working on a novel, but it isn't a novel yet. So finish it. Nobody's watching it. Nobody gives a shit.
but what you're feeling is so normal.
Every
know, and I'm a big guy. I read tons of interviews with my screenwriting heroes, and I listen to any time they're on podcasts or being interviewed, and they all talk about it. And everybody goes through it. So. But
you can bull through and just say, that's where, you can call it muscle, you can call it discipline, whatever words you want to put on it. It is what separates an amateur from a pro. And I don't mean in terms of a paycheck. You're a pro if you can do it, you're an amateur.
Discipline is a big thing, I think.
That's it. It is, finish it. Assume that some of it's going to be shitty, because you're assuming you're going back anyway to fix stuff. So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I finished this feature, and I sent my very first draft, it's not even a first, like a rough draft, to Jeff, and I knew that it was unreadable. Like, it was so bad, because I had confidence that I could send it to him, and he would understand this is a first draft. And so he was able to look at it and go, okay, I'm not looking at this on its own merit, because it's a first draft, and as Hemingway said, every first draft is shit. But he was like, okay, yeah, no, you've got the guts here, and we should do this, and try this, and do this, and
but on the other side, Hemingway killed himself. And I don't know if you listen to that. But 2, I remember a writer.
I've never written a good first draft anyway.
I remember
better than I.
Well, wait a minute. I remember a writer who sent me half of a script that he was going through some stuff in his real life, and he was like, I can't tell. I just don't know where I'm at, right? And I read it. I was like, I got to the point where he stopped writing, and I was like, what happens next? You know? And it was because his real life was obscuring his ability to see his own work. I think writers get a little too precious with themselves sometimes. This is an example of preciousness. Sometimes real life is fucking huge. But sometimes we get a little too precious with ourselves. Once you're on page 72, or once you're on page, 140, whatever it is, you really got a few more pages. Just fucking finish it. I don't want to hear it. I mean, honestly, I don't want to hear it. Because there's a guy next to you who just finished it. So I'm assuming that there's going to be some flaws. It's not going to be perfect. It's only perfect up here, right? The second you put ink on a page, it starts to suck compared to what's up here. Because this is perfect, right? Assume that. Don't assume it's shitty. I think that's even. Just assume your first draft is platinum and should be shot word for word. Don't deviate. This is a semicolon in a place where you shouldn't. Don't care. Just do what I fucking told you. That's ego. And so is everything I write is shit, and therefore must be, spat upon and given to the dog. That's also ego. Anything that impedes you from writing, just fucking write it. And then if it's not quite right, move on to that next story and then come back like Paul said.
That's the thing. I've always said, I think anybody in the world can write the first 10 pages of a screenplay. Anyone. My 8-year-old daughter could. And I'm not kidding. And I think most anyone can write the last 10 or 20 pages of a screenplay. But page 69, that page 30 to 90, that's where it takes the discipline. That's where it takes the muscle, the talent, or whatever. And I would say, and this is where we begin to crush the hopes and dreams of people, if you find yourself writing the opening of things over and over again and starting stuff and abandoning it 20 or 30 pages in, and never, you know what, you're not a writer, I'm sorry, you're not going to be a writer. You wasted your time coming here. Anybody can do it. It's going through that middle part that is the storytelling. That's not just like, oh, I got a great idea. Oh, I got an amazing opening for a movie. I was talking to this one person who teaches screenwriting, and they had this big thing. They were so excited. Like, look, I'm going to read the first page of the screenplay of my students, and listen how amazing it is. And they read this opening page, which was very provocative and set up this great thing in, a page and a half. I'm like, wow, yeah, that's great. And is she a great writer? I said, I have no idea if she's a great writer. I have no clue. She wrote a great page and a half. Anyone can do that.
There's a couple of contests I've seen where that's all they ask you to do. I'm like, don't give these people your money. And for books, screenplays, of course you can write a good opening. This is the movie.
Yeah, it's finishing. Finishing. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
We have a little bit, one more thing happening.
You kind of touched on this before, are there any other Twitter feeds other than yourselves that you would recommend? So now I'm sort of now following. Are there any other seminars that you would recommend going to? Definitely the podcast. Are there any that you would recommend?
Here's what you can do. Our boss, John Rogers, has a blog called Kung Fu Monkey.
Yeah.
It's called Kung Fu Monkey. Go into the archive.
Wait, you gotta repeat the question.
Oh, the question is, are there any other free sources on the web?
Any other Twitter feeds we would recommend, any other podcasts, anything?
That can help. One of the best things I've read about how to pitch and what it really takes to be a writer on staff, that kind of stuff. Kind of what we're doing, but with humor. Good humor. John, years ago, and it's archived on the kungfumonkey.blogspot.com, right? Is just that. It's just put in a search for how to pitch or whatever. And I've never to this day read a better assessment of what the process is, what's expected of you, the way you should approach it. And this is from a person who literally accidentally sells TV shows, who you want to kill because he accidentally, while talking about something else, can sell a TV show. But that means the information is gold. He's a working professional who just did it once again, just to say, don't buy the bullshit, here's what it is.
If you want to write stuff down, I'm just checking my Twitter right now. Jeff Lieber, who is at Jeff, Lieber. He spells Jeff properly, Jeff.
Of course, the English spelling.
He's the showrunner of NCIS New Orleans, and he is always on Twitter and will always respond to any questions. Brian Koppelman, who's half of Brian Koppelman, David Levine, who wrote Rounders, wrote one of the Ocean's movies, wrote Runaway Jury, they're badass. Brian Koppelman is always on Twitter. He's at Brian Koppelman, Koppelman. He's got it from his Twitter feed. You can find his Vines, which is hashtag 6 second screenwriting lessons. Those are gold. Who else? John August and Craig Mason are both on there. That's a podcast called Script Notes, which is worth listening to. The Nerdist Writers Panel.
Children of Tendu. Yeah, okay.
Javi Guerrero, Mark Squatch, and Jose Molina, which are both on Twitter. You can find them by just searching their names.
Our podcast is Children of Tendu.
And they have a podcast, Children of Tendu, which speaks specifically about the business of television writing, and it's excellent.
Yeah.
The Nerdist Writers Panel.
Children of what?
Tendu. TENDU.
Okay.
All these podcasts we're talking about too are available through iTunes. And they're all free. Yeah, they're free. Again, working writers give it away for free. There's another. Koppelman has a podcast that's not strictly screenwriting called The Moment with Brian Koppelman, and he interviews people from all walks of life. But he's got a few that are like Ed Burns, Tony Gilroy, David Levine, his writing partner, he interviewed. They're fantastic.
Oh, Chris Downey's podcast. Yeah, I don't think
He doesn't do that anymore.
but it's still up.
No, don't.
Wow, evil.
It's just you're not gonna get it. It's
No,
fun.
it's goofy. It's fun.
It's not give you any advice. But and from those guys, if you start there on the page, Pilar Alessandra has a podcast called On the Page. And we've already told you about Screenwriting Rant Room, so your guest runs that again through iTunes, right? You just Google or search in iTunes Screenwriters Rant Room. That's a podcast.
It is fun. It's a rough version.
And then once you get those people, then search like who they follow, who they're connected to, and you can find other people, that are on Twitter talking or.
So what do you think of people like Pilar, like Jenna Casante,
The question is, what do we think of people like Pilar Alessandra and Jen Grisante, and who was the other one?
Well,
Okay. Well, all right. We're naming names. Pilar Alessandra is a friend of mine. Pilar runs a screenwriting workshop. She makes her living charging people to teach them how to write screenplays and teleplays. Here's the thing about Pilar. As in everything in life, there is an exception to every rule. I find her to be possibly the exception to my rule, that if you can't do it, you shouldn't be teaching it. She started out as a reader. Her entire experience in Hollywood is a reader. She was a reader for DreamWorks, and you think, wow, okay, she's amazing, but then you can also look at that the other way and go, so DreamWorks was deciding what movies to make based on a fresh out of college, 22-year-old with no experience in writing or filmmaking or anything, and she's giving me thumbs up or down to what movies they should consider making. Pilar, her thing's called On the Page. That's her website and her podcast. Her podcast is fantastic. She teaches a lot of craft. I haven't taken it, but I've talked to her extensively. Pilar and I disagree on a lot of things, but I endorse her. I don't endorse paying people money to learn screenwriting, but I endorse her as having enough knowledge that I say, yeah, she knows what she's talking about. Jen Grisanti is a very nice human being and was a network executive for a lot of years. I had experience working with her, and she's been at NBC and somewhere else. She is no longer employed in that capacity, and so she's now created her own business, which is consulting. I'm doing air quotes for the people listening, on how to be a better screenwriter. Jen Grisanti's not a writer. Jen Grisanti's never written anything. Jen Grisanti has sat in rooms with a lot of writers and met with them and read a lot of scripts by people that are writers and has formed an opinion and has extensive experience in the television industry. I don't know how that makes you a better writer. I can see maybe she would have some tips about how Hollywood worked 15 years ago when she was in the business. She hasn't been in the business for a long time. Maybe she does. Maybe she has amazing information to give. I don't know. I've seen her website. I've read stuff on her website. I've seen stuff she talks about. I wouldn't spend my money.
Yeah, the buzz head. I met the girl in the green.
When you were starting your careers, how did you find your mentors? And what is a good way to approach a working writer becoming your mentor?
And the question is, how did we find our mentors, if we had any, and how would we approach a working writer for possible mentorship? Let's let Ned answer that.
And how important is a mentor?
I don't have any mentors. I got started late. I had a whole other life before I decided to be a writer or try to seriously be a writer. I got in about 10 years after most people started. So anyone who would have been a mentor was my peer. That said, when I first started writing prose, I would ask people questions. A lot of back in the early days of the internet, writers were a lot more friendly, maybe. Big time, a lot more friendly. But I was shameless. I wanted to know a physics question. I emailed Greg Bear, who was one of my favorite sci-fi writers and also a physicist. And I was like, hey, if this is blah, 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 would this work? And he's like, well, if you knew this factor and you knew this other factor, absolutely. Who the hell are you? Why would you ask me that on the blue? You didn't even compliment my work. But the truth of the matter is, what we're doing right now, it was more of a peer-to-peer type thing. So like, there was a guy who became a great friend of mine, Dwayne McDuffie, the late Dwayne McDuffie. I became aware of him when he was writing comics, and I started emailing him. I think the first fan letter I wrote to a comic book was when I was like 23, and it was to him, right? And over the years, I used him as an information source. I never asked him for a job, right? Until one day I asked him for a job and didn't get it. And then I didn't get it. But because I've been using him, I say using him, because he's been an information source for a long time, it helped me because it was somebody I could always go to. It wasn't a mentoring situation. It was more like, is this bullshit? I was like, yes, that is bullshit. Of course it is bullshit. That's why you asked me if it was bullshit. So that kind of mentoring, yes. I was lucky enough to find people doing what Paul suggested we do with this on the web. Dean Wesley Smith did it for a while for sci-fi writers for free, just started yakking, ask me anything. But mentoring, it's a difficult relationship to artificially create.
I don't think you can.
I don't think you really can. I think you fall into step with someone who's like you, and they see something of themselves in you. I think the best thing to do is find a lot of peers or just above, and respectfully, like David Toohey, right? He most recently made all the Riddick movies. Yes, I like the Riddick movies, and I don't care who knows it. And one day I just said, you know what? Let me see if I can find this fucker on the web. And I did, and I emailed him and said, did you mean to do this? And such and such and such. He's like, who are you? Why didn't you compliment my work? You know? But I had a sort of an email relationship with him for years. As long as you don't try to send me a script, we will be talking, you know? And I never sent him a script, and I asked him questions, and he was very helpful, and sometimes they were salient, you know, but usually just silly, whatever. Generally, I found these people to be fairly receptive, you know? It's the ones like Stephen King probably is not gonna get you back. But I don't think it's necessarily desirable to find a single teacher, especially in our profession. I think it's better to have a lot of peers and have a lot of influences, and sort of get in where you fit in type attitude. Paul may differ, but I'm just too old to have had I started too old to have a mentor.
I think, and while I was sitting here thinking I should have a little addendum to the Jen Gusante question. There's 2 writers on Librarians right now that are excellent writers and excellent people.
Yeah.
And they actually, I will say, they told me, we were talking about this in the writer's room, that they took some course or something from Jen Gusante, and she helped them immensely. So I just want to put that on record. Mentors, personal opinion. All this stuff up here is personal opinion. Take as much of it as you want, throw out whatever you want. My personal opinion is, I don't think a mentor relationship can be created. I think it just has to happen organically. And I think most of any sort of mentors I've had have come out of, I got hired to work for them. It wasn't like I met them and struck up a relationship or anything like that. You know, I mean, even the Affleck Damon mentorship with William Goldman, I mean, that was an arranged marriage. I just think it just happens. And I had I would say Barbara Hall was a mentor of mine. And I don't really know of anyone else that I would say I had an actual mentor-mentee relationship with in my career.
But a good boss or a good editor does function as a teacher. They don't intend to do that, it's not their job. But I mean, Barbara Hall is legendary. I had a brief time as one of my bosses with her. She's fantastic. You learn a lot, but like so do you learn from your next producer up. Like let's say you're a staff writer, everybody's working late, and there's a supervising producer who needs some eyes on their project, you know, on their episode, and they say come in. You know, it doesn't matter, it could be the janitor, but you happen to be your staff writer, so come in and look at this. You learn more in that 20 minutes looking at their work and trying to give something salient back to help them, trying to help them, than you would in a year of screenwriting classes, from my point of view.
To answer the other question about how you approach a working writer, that again is a little bit subjective and tough, but I think social media has helped that a lot. Like I said, you know, you can approach writers on Twitter and
see what happens.
And they're pretty much, from my experience, from what I've seen on Twitter and been part of interactions, they're pretty open to it. You know, generally Jeff and I are pretty open to talking to people like that. I think the one thing you got to remember when approaching working writers is they're working. Yeah. So the whole thing about, hey, will you read my script? I'm not going to read your script, okay? Because I'm too busy reading the scripts for the shows that I'm trying to put on the air right now, and I'm too busy developing the other scripts for the shows, and I'm too busy working on my own stuff to get my next job. And so the will you read my script thing does not fly, and that's a really fast way to alienate working writers, especially if you don't have a personal relationship with them.
The reason I was saying the Dwayne McDuffie thing is that every time I've gotten good feedback from a writer, like someone who I felt was stratospherically above me, was because I approached them as a writer. I never, the schmooze, if I smell a schmooze, you get the James Bond eject out of it. You think I'm kidding, I'm really not. That's the frostiest thing I can say. If I feel like you think you're smart enough to work me, you're done. One chance, you're out. But if you're sincerely just like, you know, like next question, like I'm in the weeds, is there any trick? Is there any way through this? Is there anything you can tell me that might help me out? What kind of an asshole would I be if I didn't at least say, well, this is what I do. You know, what does that hurt me? What does it hurt you? But it has to be sincere from your side, because most of us, I think, get.
Yeah, I mean, a quick story about it. A friend of mine, I split my time between LA and St. Louis, and a friend of mine in St. Louis contacted me once and said, hey, I got this buddy who is an aspiring screenwriter. You know, will you read his script? Or can I hook you guys up? Can I, you know, introduce you to the intro on, you know, email and stuff? And I said, sure. Craig is a good friend of mine. And I said, absolutely. And so, you know, he introduced us, and this guy, you know, he and I swapped a couple of emails, and then he hit me up with, I've got the screenplay, you know, can I send it to you? Will you look at it? And I said, here's the thing. Yes, you can send it to me. I am telling you I will read it. I am not telling you when. I may get to it a week from now. I may get to it 6 months from now. I can't promise you when I'll read it. But yes, I'm telling you, if you send it to me, I will read it. And he sent it to me. That was in August of last year. I read it in February. The reason I read it, and then I contacted him and I gave him a full-blown note session on it, because he didn't bug me once during that August to February time. And I forgot about it 2 or 3 times, and then I'd find it in my email section, like, oh, I gotta read that guy's script, okay? But it was, if he had been bugging me, I would have just pushed it farther and farther away. And finally, it was out of my own guilt that I was like, I gotta read this guy's script, because, you know what, he was legit. Yeah. And so I felt bad, and so I read it. You know, it doesn't matter if it's good or not, but I read it, and I contacted him and I said, hey, I read your script. What would you like to hear? And he's like, I'd love to just have any of your thoughts as a professional writer. I was like, okay, get ready. And I sent him, you know, 6 paragraphs of notes on his screenplay. But he had to wait, you know.
How did he respond?
Thank you very much. That's great help. I had never thought of that. And
well, the reason I asked you, obviously, is
yeah, that's the other thing.
I always ask people, and this is even with Paul, peers of mine, I say, what kind of feedback do you want? Because
it's really important.
You can get frosty, Jeff. But most people don't like frosty, Jeff.
Because there's a difference between people, and again, this is another little tip to separate the real writers from the wannabes, and maybe look in the mirror and see if you're a real writer or not. The people that want notes and they don't care if you shred their work, those are writers. The people that want a pat on the head and say, hey, wow, I love your screenplay, man. Yeah, that was great. They're not writers. Or if you give somebody asks for notes and you give them notes, and it's like somebody with, 20 years experience doing the job, giving notes to somebody that has written 1 or 2 screenplays in their life while working at, Walgreens. If you get offended by my notes and think I don't know what I'm talking about, good luck, man.
Yeah, it's gladiator sport.
Okay, Greensletter. Ned Thorne actually asked my question almost exactly. He answered it amazingly. So I'll
That's his superpower.
I know. But I'll ask a somewhat related question. How do you get up every day and motivate yourself?
Oh my God! Please can I answer this?
No, you're not.
He knows my life. How do we not put a gun in our mouth? And the question is, how do we keep from killing ourselves every day? We do this.
How do you?
To write without, when you're not writing for anyone, you're not writing for a deadline, you're not writing for pay, you're just writing for yourself.
How do you motivate without a paycheck?
Without a paycheck?
Well, without a deadline.
1, I make artificial deadlines. 2, I'm always writing for me. Even when someone's paying me, I'm always writing for me, because I don't think there's a difference. I don't think there can be a difference certainly quality. But a friend of mine, who's now a friend of mine, he wasn't at the time, says, you know, I want to get into writing for TV and all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, you can write a script, but you don't get 6 freaking months, okay? So if you really want to do it, here's what you do. Simulate the pitch process, give yourself a week, right, where you come up with the basic ideas, several episodes of whatever this thing is you want to do. And then you take that week and narrow it down, right? And then the next week you write some version of an outline, whatever you call an outline. And then you write that script within 10 to 14 days, period. And if you don't, you're fired. You know, it's harsh in a way, but it goes back to this muscling through a page, whatever. It's all part and parcel of the same event. You decide you're a professional before anyone's paying you. You behave like a professional before anyone's paying you. J.K. Rowling is the professional novelist, right? She is the archangel of professional novelists right now. I don't think the money is making her roll out of bed to write the next book. And certainly after you've made a certain amount of money, it ain't the money that's making you write more books. Stephen King is not writing for money, right? Take the money, but he's not writing for money. So I think that you have to really keep coming back to the same few phrases. You have to knuckle down with yourself in the mirror and say, is this a hobby or am I for real? And if it's a hobby, go with God. You know, take your time, do whatever, write whatever, however. But if you want to do this, know the rules of the game and play by them so that you're used to them. That it's old hat for you when that first paycheck, when that first job comes across. You've been doing it for a year and they just don't know. And then you know what they'll do? You're like, holy, how old are you? You, what? You know, you turned it in when? You know, look at this, it's clean, dude. It's freaking clean. I don't have to do anything. That's all because you prepped. That's all because you trained yourself, your home training. Right? What did Michael Jordan train himself from a bencher to a
cut from his high school team?
Right? Right. But he goes.
Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball.
What does he do? Basketball, dunking, basketball, shooting, basketball, dribbling every day instead of going to the movies.
I agree with all that. The only thing I would add is I know it's hard. How do you get up every day and motivate yourself to write when you're not being paid to write and when you only have a certain amount of time to write every day and you've got your head filled with everything else going on in your life, and how do you focus that time? And the only answer is you have to find that in yourself. And my advice is I treat it like a job, whether it's a job or not. Is if you have a day job where you work 9 to 5 somewhere, well then you can't write between 9 and 5. You know that. Okay? You can't write when you're asleep. So take that, 5, 6, 8 hours out of the time. So that leaves, basically another 8 hours or more during your 24-hour day that you can find time to write. And certainly there's things where you got to play with your dog, you got to do this, you got to think. But you've got to find the time.
Say 5. You got to eat. You have family obligations.
However much it is.
Yeah.
You have to, whether you can be a successful, good quality writer if you are writing 2 hours a day. That is the secret to the job. Writers who write, when people like me, when I'm not on a show, when I'm sitting in St. Louis and I get up every morning and I go sit in front of my computer, if I'm in front of my computer 6, 7 hours that day, I'm writing maybe 90 minutes. That's a good day, 2 hours, okay? You have to treat it like a job. You have to get disciplined. If you know you have to be at work at a certain time every day, then you need to wake up an hour earlier than you normally do every single day and say, I'm going to wake up. This is what I've adopted this really quickly for my recent writing in the past year. I learned this from listening to Josh Watkins, who was the kid that Searching for Bobby Fischer was based on. He was a world chess champion for years. He left chess. He became a world champion at Tai Chi. He wrote a book called The Art of Learning because he was like, wow, I became a world champion at 2 completely different things. How did I do that? And he wrote this book basically, and the short answer to the book, not that you shouldn't buy the book, but it's a great book, I'd buy it, but it's basically focus. I started this last year and it changed my writing life. And this is 2014, after I'd been doing this 15 years. And it was, I wake up in the morning and before I do anything, before I check my email, before I look at Twitter, before I look at any text messages, before I do anything, I sit down at the computer to work. And he calls it a creative burst. And I cannot recommend this enough for anyone. And it sounds so easy. Trust me, if you try it, it's super hard to do. It is focusing on nothing for the first hour or hour and a half of your day except writing. Once you hit that 90-minute mark or even 60-minute mark, then check your email, do whatever. And the theory behind it is that you are waking up and you are putting your mind into a proactive mode, not a reactive mode. The second you look at your phone, you are reacting. The second you look at Twitter, the second you answer an email or even read one, you have put yourself into a reactive place for that day. And it's that much harder to dig out of that hole and become proactive as a creator of content when you're sitting down to write. So, and then he has another thing where you do the same thing at the end of the day. You allow a half hour before you go to bed and you shut your phone off and you shut everything else off and you write for that half hour. So when you go to bed, the last thing in your brain is that proactive creation. You wake up the next morning and the first thing in your brain, it has changed my writing. I have produced more content and better content in the last year since I started doing that than in the previous 5 years.
Wow.
Okay, so who's still got a question that hasn't asked one yet? Okay, and then we'll take second question.
The guy pretending to be Ned
Any more
Thorne.
web people?
We have one more, but another one to do one more.
You're pretending to be Ned Thorne.
How to do it.
No one can be that Thorne.
His doppelganger.
Settle down, settle down. I've worked with Ned Thorne.
Oh.
I've interacted with Ned Thorne. You, sir, are no Ned Thorne.
Okay, so we're gonna take over the internet, and then you, and then we'll see.
So internet.
Wait.
Internet, and then Jay, and then the guy in the red shirt.
Okay.
In your experience, what's the best way to find your voice through writing alone, with a partner, or as a group?
In our experience, what is the best way to find your voice?
Alone,
Alone, writing in a group, or
with a partner.
with a partner?
That's just time and writing. But I would say spending too much time with a single writer's group will do what Paul was saying about taking classes. It will flatten your writing out and it will.
Writers groups can be the worst thing in the world for writers. If you are in a group that doesn't have good writers in it,
Right.
okay? You should never be in a writers group where you look around and say, I'm one of the best writers in here. Because if you are,
Quit.
then
Get out.
it's the old con man thing. If you look around the room and you can't find the schmuck, guess who the schmuck is? Okay? Writers groups are fantastic as long as you're getting feedback from people that are as good or better than you are. And that is so hard to find. And I see these writers groups all the time, and it's a bunch of aspiring writers who have so much enthusiasm, but they don't have the chops yet. And they're all sitting around telling each other what's wrong with their screenplays and their novels. And they're just killing themselves because they don't know what's wrong with it. So they're just going, well, I wouldn't have opened it with all the trees and stuff. I would have opened it at the circus. And I said, oh, okay, good. And he goes and he rewrites it, and and it becomes opening at the circus. And maybe opening it with the trees was the greatest thing ever. It's so dangerous.
I think
Yeah, go ahead.
writing, finding your voice, that phrase has always bugged the shit out of me, because you find your voice after just writing a lot of stuff.
Whether it's with a partner or alone.
With or without.
If you have a writing partner, I would say this is the other thing. If you feel like, oh, I've got to get a writing partner because I can't really write myself, I got great ideas, but I can't really finish stuff, so I should find a writing partner. No, you're not a writer. Okay? That means you're just trying to latch on to somebody who is a writer.
I'm an
and
idea
help you
man.
finish
I'm an
stuff.
idea man.
Yeah, idea. There are more idea men in Hollywood than there are Starbucks and coffee beans combined. It's just finding your voice is that. It's writing. And this whole thing too, I actually think voice is super important and super critical, but it's very esoteric, and it's you can't teach voice. It's like I don't believe you can teach dialogue. You want to become great at writing dialogue? Be a great listener.
Yeah.
That's it. Voice is something that is born out of writing over and over and over.
These sorts of things that we're doing and what the people Paul's mentioned on the web are doing, none of this is a shortcut. There's no shortcut. There is no shortcut. There's no hookup. There's no special secret door you slide through. It's just muscling through and writing a lot of stuff. You know, and people put numbers on, you're gonna write 1 million words before, bullshit, you're gonna write shitty stuff after that 1 million words. You're gonna write great stuff before that 1 million words. The difference is you don't know, shut up, John. You don't know what you're writing. So voice, control of your voice is a better phrase, right? You have the voice to begin with, but you don't know what it is. I look back on all of my writing recently, because I just did for no reason, and turns out a lot of the stuff I write about has to do with romantic love. But I didn't set out to do that. It's just a lot of my stories tend to hinge on a female-female, male-male, male-female relationship. Oh, do I love you? How do I love you? Who knew? I'm in my mid-40s, and I maybe found my voice. You know, I think it is constant trial and error, but mostly constant trial.
I think another thing that's really dangerous to the voice thing is getting into these homogenized formulaic classes and online things and you know, formatting stuff. There's such a difference. Jeff and I talk about this all the time, difference between screenplay structure and story structure. They are two completely different animals. And just really quick about the voice thing, I have a friend of mine who's a great writer, and he has not succeeded, and he has been at it for years. He is a grinder. This guy is not giving up. He's made short films. He's just fantastic. And he got frustrated enough a few years ago that he hooked up with a writing partner, and he started writing stuff together. They write stuff together. And recently he sent me their latest feature film. And he's like, I want, you know, tell me what you think. And he and I have that relationship where we're very honest with each other. And I read it. It's a fantastic idea for a movie. It has an amazing, like, protagonist, lead character. It's a setting you've never seen before. It's a classic Western genre. But the whole thing was just flat. And it was because there was no voice. He, and this is a guy, he got hooked up with his writing partner, and they started taking all the seminars, and they took McKee, and they read Snyder, and they did the Pilar, and they've done, like, every time they get money together, they take a class. And it was so apparent in his screenplay, because his earlier stuff was his unique voice. It's a guy he is in love with, like I am, and that's how we originally bonded. He is like a huge fan of Sam Peckinpah, and Waylon Green, and John Ford, and his voice came out of that, and now he's with this partner, and they are trying to succeed instead of writing. And this screenplay, which has such a great idea, it was just flat. Everything structured is perfect, okay? First act, second act, it's bulletproof structure. There's no heart to it, there's no soul to it, because he's lost his voice. He's not writing from his soul or his heart anymore. He's writing to try to write a perfect screenplay.
Also, the perfect screenplay is a perfectly formatted screenplay. It's like it's like how I enjoy sound.
Fast Times at Ridgemont has a perfect screenplay.
Stop it. You guys, they mock me in the room because I don't listen to movie soundtracks for pleasure. I only notice a movie soundtrack when something sucks. Right? Oh, Jesus, just turn that shit off. But that's kind of how screenplay works. No one's grading you. Right? No executive, nobody who's buying your script is going. They only notice the screenplay mistake, right? So you can only get it so perfect by format. You can only use the math up to this point. The math only helps you to make it clean looking, right? After that, tell a story, because that's what sells the scripts. You know, I think what Paul's describing is this sort of phenomenon of trying to apply mathematical or geometrical structures to something that isn't built that way, you know, and we all are seeking the control that someone giving you that edge, right? If I can just know, oh my God, if I just saved that fucking cat, you know, and that's not what it is.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so I think you said earlier, like, you know, you're treating, like, when you're writing for yourself or doing something on spec, you're treating it like a work day. You may work 6 hours a day. And I forget how much time did you say, like, during those 6 hours you're actually writing?
Hour and a half.
Hour and a half. So I'm curious about what's happening outside of that time. And what's aside from, like, wanting to shoot yourself and kill yourself.
So the question is, what do we do during our writing time when we're not actually typing words?
Yes.
So for me, a lot of it, I can't, this is just, again, me personally, I'm sure Jeff will have a different answer. I can't write without music. I can't start writing anything until I found the right music. I have a playlist on my iTunes for every single project.
How late you started on that one?
Oh, I had my first leverage episode I had to write. You know, you get 2 weeks to write your script. Like 5 days in almost, Chris Downing, one of the showrunners, said, "How's it going?" I said, "I haven't started yet." He's like,
Excuse me?
"What?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I haven't found the music yet." He's like, "You're an idiot."
What do you mean you haven't found the freaking music? What is wrong with you?
But then I found the music and I wrote the script. And so, to answer your question, what I'm doing in between that time is sometimes it's what we in the writers room call staring at the ceiling, where I'm just thinking. I'm not on, like when you see me on Twitter, playing around on Twitter and stuff, that's when I'm in what I call my breaks. Like I have this thing called Mac Freedom on my computer, which I punch in a certain number of minutes and it shuts off my internet access because I don't have the discipline to do it myself. Oh, it's great. It's free at Mac Freedom. Oh shit. And so I will sit down, I'll do my morning thing where I have my burst and I'm so locked into that now, I don't even need to shut the internet off because I just know. And so then once that first hour and a half happens, I take a break, I'll physically wander around, you know, I will not think about the writing because it's percolating on the back burner. I will focus on, you know, whether I'm making coffee, whether I'm going outside, whether I'm, you know, looking at whatever on the internet, on Twitter, and I'll do that for usually no more than a half hour, maybe an hour. And then I sit back down in the seat, and that's when a lot of times I've got to put the Mac Freedom on. The music helps me tremendously. I put my playlist on, and I'll sit there literally sometimes through 3, 4, 5 songs until I'm back into it, and I'm in that world in my head, and I start thinking. And if I'm at a scene that I don't know what to write next, and I can't type, that thing that sometimes people call writer's block, is then I'm like, okay, I'll start scrolling back through what I've already written, and I'll start tweaking the thing here. I'll go, oh, I've got 4 lines of dialogue here. He could say that in 2 lines. I'll cut that, and I'll just slowly get myself back in. To where, you know, like if I say I actually type an hour and a half, 2 hours out of a 6 or 7 hour day, it's not all in a row. It's 10 minutes of typing here, you know, 5 minutes typing there, 2 minutes of typing here. And the other time, it's just, I'm a big food person and amateur cook, very amateur. But I equate a lot of it to cooking, and it's just stuff that's marinating. You know, I've got 4 different burners going with different things, and you know, my idea, I want to get al dente, but you know, all the character stuff and the nuances and all the sauces and everything that are all simmering, they're just all simmering while I'm sitting there just listening to my music, staring at the ceiling, or looking at some other part of the screenplay.
Yeah, I'm more visually oriented, I guess, coming from drawing for so long. So generally when I'm in my writing mode like that, to cleanse my palate, because that's what I think it really is you can get this close to the freaking screen and you're like, I don't even know what that word is. Is that a word? You know, I'll go draw, or I'll watch a cartoon, but with the sound on, right? Just for the visual stimulation, my eyes tracking something, or I'm generally I try to have more than one project going, but not all writing projects, right? Like Paul said about cooking or whatever. So if I get to a place where it's like, all right, I'm thinking about this a lot. I can't stop working, but I should stop this for a while. I will go work on a comic book thing, or I'll build something, you know, not that I'm good at the building part, but just something that's oblique to what you were just doing that makes you not front brain think about it. Because often the back of your brain will solve this thing if you just stop hitting it.
Very often. But that's the danger too, is you've got to be disciplined enough to recognize when you're doing the thing that Raskin, I think, the quote of what no spouse of a writer will ever understand is when they're sitting in a chair staring out the window, they're actually working.
Oh my God.
You have to have the discipline to understand the difference between you're in that staring out the window mode of working, or when you're using that as an excuse to go to Dave & Buster's and like, oh, I'm working, ski ball, yeah. It's like, no, you're not working, okay? And there's a difference. And there's been times, I mean, I'm to the point now where I'm disciplined enough with myself that, you know, if I'm at home, I mean, when I'm working like I am now on the show, we're in the office every day. And when I leave that office, unless I have an outline or something specific to work on, as soon as I walk out of the office, I wash librarians out of my brain.
Right.
Because I have other stuff I want to work on. I have other stuff that I need to get done for Paul that, you know, I only have time when I'm not in the office.
Because sometimes I'll have to contact him or whatever, and I feel a little bit bad because I'm like, I know that you've closed the door, and it's like, shit, can this wait till morning or whatever? Sometimes it can't. It sucks, but you know.
Great, sure.
Yeah, I was wondering if you, for aspiring writers, I know you work in both features and in television. Do you think it's important for aspiring writers to work in both mediums? And also, can you talk about, I guess, the dynamics of the writers itself?
The question is it important for writers to work both in television and features? And what was the second part? I'm sorry.
Just the dynamics. Talk about the dynamics of the writers and like how.
Oh, that's a fun question. Okay, and the dynamics of the writers' room. As far as, I mean, the first part of the question, I don't know if it's important. Like, as far as when I hear important, I think necessary or means. It goes back to if your brain and heart is passionate about television writing, write that. I think once you have to ask yourself, should I be writing features and TV? Then you've crossed into that, I'm trying to write to the marketplace, I'm trying to write to get a job, and I think you're doomed. Yeah. I think if you feel like I've got a great idea for a feature, I've got a great idea for a television pilot, write them both, absolutely guaranteed. But when you are questioning whether or not you should be doing that, I think that's your answer then, is the answer is no. You need to be working on what you just feel like, I've got to write this story. Dynamics of the writer's room?
Okay. It depends on the room, for one thing. Our particular, working for John Rogers in particular, is different than working, well, let me start again. Every showrunner's room is different, 100% different. It's the personality of the person running the show that determines how the room works. But there are different sort of agreed upon structures for how a writer's room works. There's the comedy room, which is essentially a free-for-all, joking at each other, trying to come up with the funniest bit. And generally, it's fairly frosty in that it's the funniest bit that wins. We don't care who you know or whatever. That made everybody laugh. I know you know Jerry Lewis, but sorry, you know. And then at the other extreme, and it's everyone in the room all the time, kind of. And at the other extreme would be like, I guess the Dick Wolf show is a good example. You meet with your showrunners at the beginning of the season to sort of work out a little bit of what the arc, if there is one, might be, some tonal things you want to do, what the actors will and won't do if they're big stars or whatever. And then you sort of pitch out your notions, and you'll either get them approved or not. And then you're kicked out to go work on those things in your individual office spaces, okay? And then the showrunner comes down and sort of spot checks each one. And then how much you interact with the other writers is kind of up to you and the other writers do. Some shows you could conceivably be on a staff together and never interact with one. And then there's the in the middle part, which is kind of what we do at Leverage, at Librarians. We don't really have offices because, you know, we're a little podunk independent, in the last independent show on television, or at least studio. So we don't have offices to go to. So we are structured like a comedy room, but it's also more like a teaching hospital for John. He sort of structures it that way. So the hierarchical aspects of being in a writer's room, executive producer, co-EP, supervising producer, co-producer, and so on down, those hierarchical ranks do have some social value depending on the writer's room you're in. You know when you have to hell out, basically. If someone above your station is really making a point, probably not a good plan to interrupt them, you know. But in some rooms, like the one we're in, those hierarchical concerns are basically put aside in favor of what's the best story idea. So it's more of a free-for-all, more like a comedy room in some ways, but less frenetic. And there is a social dance. I've known people, and I'm sure Paul has as well, where a lot of the social aspect of who's friends with who and who's better at ingratiating themselves, all the crap that I'm frankly lousy at. I'm absolutely the last person to schmooze my way into a better job. I have no poker face. I'm shitty at lying. I'm just not good at it. And I'm weird. I don't like a lot of the stuff that the average American, like I don't care about sports and things like that. But those are, all that's grease, all that stuff that you could use to start to form emotional bonds with people. I don't have a lot of that, so I like rooms where it's more merit-based. But I've heard horror stories about rooms where it ain't. And you have to be prepared in both instances. You have to sort of, my rule of thumb is do great work, keep your head out of the stuff that doesn't concern you as much as you can, and be strategic in when you speak. You know, my hardest part, I think, is I ramble a bit when I'm pitching out ideas.
Jeff doesn't ramble, does he?
No, you're on my side, you're all new people.
Yeah, the writer's room, every room is different. We're in a room right now, which is very unique to John Rogers, where the credits don't matter. The writer's assistant literally has a voice in the room equal to the co-executive producer when we're breaking story. That's not normal. It has its pros and cons. One of the cons of it is I think these writers get a little sense of false entitlement, and then they go on to another show where this doesn't exist, and they get themselves in trouble. Generally, writers' rooms, the staff writers, for the most part, they don't say much. They are the worker bees, and then the executive story editors, the story editors, the co-producers, they have a little more juice, and a little more, you know, most writers' rooms in television, what are called upper-level writers, the producer, supervising producer, co-EP, EP, they're the ones that are generating the stories. They're the ones that are driving the rooms, and the other people are the worker bees. They're the drones that are hanging on and, you know, listening and taking notes and doing whatever. The room that we're in is very different from that. And I did at the beginning of Leverage and I did at the beginning of Librarians. I take the writers out, the new writers, and I sit them down and I go, this is going to be the greatest experience of your life and it will never be like this ever again. Let's go to the boss. So you need to understand and appreciate that. And most of them have gone on and remembered that. And a couple of them were like, yeah, no, I'm just going to not listen. They're out of work right now.
I will say this, the safest thing you can think of when you're staffing on a show is this. As a staff writer, my job is it's assumed you can write or you wouldn't be there. On some level, it's assumed you can write. Your job as a staff writer is to make your showrunner stay as easy as you possibly can. They should smile when they see you. They should literally go, oh, Jeff's here, right? Maybe it doesn't translate into you getting a script that year. You might not. But your job is never to make their day any harder than it already really is. They should, at absolute most, they should forget you exist. Right? And that's the worst that a showrunner should think of a staff writer. Oh, right, you work for me. Right? But if you do it right, you're that person who gets called into your supervising producer's office to help work with their script, right? You prove you can write by how you use your brain when requested, right? So you don't overstep, you don't punch, you don't get into any kind of bristling anything with anybody. It's like, Paul's the showrunner, what do I do? I serve at the pleasure of that president. What do I do to make his day easy? And I don't mean bringing him freaking flowers, you know? And that simple rule can, clearly in my life, has gotten me through a lot of sort of what would otherwise be socially awkward situations, because I'm a socially awkward person a lot of the time. But whenever you go, the job is X, I will simply put my head down and do the job very well. Not a bad way to get through things.
Okay, so I don't think we have any more time for questions, but okay, everybody who wants to ask a question, raise your hand.
Oh,
and we're gonna have a gladiator match between the questions.
Oh my God.
So you have 25 seconds for your question, and you can pick one each of you.
All right, that's fair.
So go ahead.
How important is shooting your own shit?
Cool, next.
How much of it all is recirculating your process?
Okay, anyone else want to get in the match? Yeah.
Talk about more of the creativity versus the mechanics of writing.
Okay, anyone else? Yeah.
How do you balance between shutting the hell up in the room and making sure your showrunner knows who you are so it's time you're hired again?
I can't just one day down.
You know, you guys, you could just we'll just amalgamate everything. We gotta hear them all at once.
Can you talk about the importance of branding yourself and writing in one specific genre for your spec work versus doing everything you want to do?
Okay, and we have one more from the internet, which I think you kind of already answered, which is it important for a new screenwriter, which is better, film or TV, to get into the industry? Anyone else?
Yes. You talked about
you shouldn't worry about an agent, so I'm curious about when an agent starts becoming important and what it does for you.
Okay, you got that, guys?
Holy smokes.
And then after that, just sum everything up, your best piece of advice.
That's not fair, man. These people drove all the way here. Who wants to go over? Right?
Okay, we'll make an announcement. If you have to go at 1, we are not gonna judge you or boo you when you leave.
You saw my mother and grandmother walk out.
Okay, so you guys just take the questions how you want, but if you haven't asked a question just now, and you don't do it right now, you're done. Yes.
You talked about agents, you got any ideas about managers?
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, everybody, for your questions.
All right. So we just going.
Just go ahead.
I need to remember them all.
No, it's not important to shoot your own stuff.
That's-
But you can. Again, passion. If that's what you want to do, if you want to shoot your own stuff, do it. If you want to do it, like I'm going to shoot my own stuff so I can get a job doing this. No. I mean, I told somebody once, they were talking about, I want to be a writer, I want to produce stuff, I want to direct stuff, and I was like, you got to pick one thing to get in the club. You can be J.J. Abrams after you're in the club. No one's going to hire you to be J.J. Abrams in the beginning. You've got to say, I'm a writer, here's my writing. Or I'm a director, here's what I've directed. Or I'm a producer, here's all the stuff I produced, other people's stuff. Then you get in the club and you can be J.J. Abrams. But as long as you're spreading yourself out like that, you're never going to make it. So just not.
Focus.
Yeah, it's a focus thing.
First strike is a focus strike. That's it.
Well, yours was cool. Creativity versus mechanics. Yeah. I think, here's the thing. The blank page. It all starts with the blank page. You cannot be analytical about a blank page. You've got to start the story from a story, all story. It's imagination. It's whimsy, whether it's Seven or whether it's Bed Knobs and Broomsticks. It's whimsy. It's creation and imagination. That's where I think so many of these gurus go wrong, is you have to have that before you have anything else. Before you have any story. Like he said, you can learn structure and format later. But if you have a good story, tell your story. Get your story down on paper. Then go, okay, is this structurally sound? Then you can go back and you can, look at it analytically after you've got your creation down. And then you can go, okay, you know what? My story kind of bottoms out here. Why? Oh, I see. Because I don't really have a third act. I have a great opening and I've got this middle act and I don't really have a good, Chef was a great, I enjoyed Chef very much. Chef had no third act. Jon Favreau just decided, okay, the movie's over now. They're going to get married again and it's all worked out. Okay? Perfectly set up first act structurally. Second act, they're on the truck, they're doing everything. Perfect structure. There's no third act. Movie just ended. Okay? That's the structural part. That's the mechanics, but I think it has to come after.
Can I ask you, what do you mean, what is it that you're meaning when you say creativity versus structure?
Your imagination, sitting down. Sometimes you talk to people and your idea is so out there.
Yeah.
It's beyond what they can imagine.
Okay, that's pitching. When you're coming up with a thing and writing it, go off. I mean, especially with features, the whole point of it is it's basically a book, right? You're going off to make something up that they haven't seen. Hopefully it will appeal to them. For writing for TV, as I said at the beginning, you're largely writing for other people. So you have to figure out how your creativity is going to interact, how your personal creativity is going to interact with whatever shows you think you'd be good to write for. So it's not so much that I love comics and I can write an episode of The Flash. It's what episode of The Flash can I write that the existing staff could not come up with.
And here's the thing, if you write a script, whether it's TV or film, that is amazing because from its production, that it can be shot so succinctly and it can, wow, we could do this thing in 24 days and this is great and all these locations here, that is rarely, if ever, going to get you your first writing gig. If you write something that's unshootable from a production standpoint, but is amazing from an imagination standpoint, you're going to be a working
Didn't
writer.
somebody do like a Flintstones Sopranos crossover or stuff? You think I'm laughing, but people did crazy stuff, scripts like that.
But that's the difference. That's, and your question was,
So we're talking about research, like, if you,
How much does research play a part in our job?
Project to project.
About sports, like.
Project to project. When we were on Leverage, none of us are actually thieves. So, no, right? I mean, we had go-to people who had expertise in some of these environments. If you're, Paul, I'm not gonna say what his script is about, but it's not set in this era. So there's things he's gonna wanna know. Stop it, I saw you do that. There's things he's gonna need to go and dig into about everything from lingo to how big was the city back then. Like if you look at old New York versus current New York, it ain't quite the same place. Stuff like that. So research, I feel like research is necessary, but frankly, if you can get away, if you write something and everyone thinks you did your research, you win. You know? My feeling on that stuff is what is plausible is better than what is factual if it makes the story better.
I love research. To me, it serves as inspiration. This feature thing I did was a period piece that involved extensive research for literally years.
Yeah.
But then also, like, part of Leverage, what I loved about Leverage is to this day my favorite television job I've ever had, because the research that was involved with con men and grifting and thieves and heists, and I sucked all that up. I mean, almost, even though Leverage was a made up show, almost every single episode, the heist or the plot of every single episode was born out of real life.
And a lot of the
one way or
crap, a lot of the crap. That was a fun show too, only because not all, but one of the fun things was the fans would almost always get what was fake wrong. Like the stuff that we would make up was often less interesting than this crazy crap we find out in our research, and they would always go, "Oh, that's science fiction." Like, actually, no, they did this until
Yeah. What was yours, Leland?
It was, to not be Dr. No in the room, but you don't want your showrunner to call security when you see you.
Okay.
How do you find the balance of opening your mouth in a room?
I would say depending on the series, depending on how the showrunner runs their show, I would say as a staff writer, your response when you speak should only be yes, right? If you're speaking, it's never to say what doesn't work in somebody else's thing. It's only to add something positive to. And if you don't have that, perfectly fine to shut the hell up for a while.
Never pitch a problem without a solution.
Yeah, that's a rule. Never.
There are people in writers' rooms, and all they do is blow up other people's pitches and other people's ideas, and they don't have a solution for it. And it might be a bad, John might pitch a terrible idea, and Lance over here is going to say that idea sucks, but Lance doesn't have a fix for it, so Lance should shut the hell up.
We all know it sucks.
I'm never hiring Lance.
What else do we do? Yeah, that's the thing. Gentlemen, when I get sucks,
and the thing, like,
writers, they know it sucks.
And the room that we're in, like I said, is very different, because the staff writers, even the writer's assistant, is encouraged to speak up as much as I am or Jeff, the two producers on the show, and it's great because on one hand, it's really giving them, it's building these new writers. There's 3 writers in the room this year that have never written in television before. And it's building their confidence. Like, I can already see 4 or 5 weeks into the room how much stronger they are just walking in the room. They just feel better. They're not as sheepish. They're speaking up. They're understanding story more because they're talking and they're interacting. But that said, if they disagree with something that John or myself wants to do, you're allowed one pass. You can go in and say, and we have this term about digging in. You can dig in and say, well, I just don't agree with that. That doesn't work for me. Well, it's fine. I understand that. This is how we're going to do it because it's our show. There are certain writers that will continue to fight. And that's bad. It's okay in John Rogers' room because he's the greatest guy in the world and lets everybody have their voice. And we'll actually waste time in our room because we won't be able to move forward until everyone's in agreement, which I personally don't think is the most productive thing.
It's not
my writer's room.
John is
an amazing,
unique structure.
But so if you're on a show that's not a Jeff Rogers show, I think my best advice for anyone starting out as a staff writer in television is you go in and you speak when you're spoken to the first week or two, and you wait and you sit back. And here's the thing: if you're a writer and you're good enough that you got hired to write on a television show, you know a little something about human behavior. Okay? Because I think the greatest quote ever in the history of the world about writing was what Tony Gilroy said, that your ability to write is absolutely capped at your level of understanding human behavior. You will never be able to write above what you know about people. If you don't understand anything about human behavior, you will always be a bad writer. So, as a staff writer, you go in and you keep your mouth shut for the first week or two, and you just get the vibe of the room.
Feel it out.
And you feel out the personalities, and you see, okay, she's kind of like this. She's very much speaks up when this particular plot or character comes up, and this guy's always negative over here. And you know, this writing team over here, they tend to always kind of sit back until somebody says something great, and then they go, "Yeah, that's what we were gonna say." And you know, and you get the vibe of the room, and then slowly you start speaking up, and you just pick your places, you know. And that's, I think, the healthiest, most respectful way to become an enjoyable part of the writer's room.
And if you keep the phrase, "I serve at the pleasure of the president," remember your job is not to make them notice you, it's to make their show better.
Yeah, Javi, if you go back to that Children of Tendu podcast, Javi and Jose Molina, they've got a couple of great stories on that podcast about very young, inexperienced writers challenging the producers in the room. And yeah, that's
like
really
watching a plane slowly crash.
What was yours?
Pigeonholing yourself versus branding yourself, doing just sci-fi versus comedy, and then
Right. We kind of answered that a little bit early on, and I think we're both in agreement that the short answer is it's not, especially starting out, it's not about branding yourself or trying, it's like you got to write what's in your heart. You got to write what you're passionate about. And if your only passion is a very specific subgenre of sci-fi, that's what you write.
Yeah.
You know, if you are just a storyteller and you have a great idea for screwball comedy and you have a dark serial killer thriller, write them both.
Yeah.
It's you have to serve your soul as a writer. That's the fastest way to get good and get hired. And then once you're in the club, then you can figure out, like, I mean, I had to make a choice early on because I had written both comedy specs and 1 hour drama specs. I had 2 agencies that wanted to sign me, and one wanted to sign me as a comedy writer, and one wanted to sign me as a 1 hour guy. And I had to make that choice. And I chose the 1 hour route because it was just what I felt in my heart at the time. And it was the greatest decision ever for me because I would have totally failed as a sitcom writer.
The other thing about writing, and I said this earlier about writing genre, because that's almost exclusively what, if I were known for anything, which I doubt that I am, but if I were, almost my entire catalog is some genre. But people don't watch TV for that. They watch it for the characters. So in theory, if you wrote your epic steampunk pilot, that might be the thing that people kind of talk about a little bit at first. But the characters, it's always going to come down to, did you write real relationships? Because the thing is, the script you write, if you're staffing for a show, is almost by definition not going to be the show you get staffed on. They're going to be reading something else, right? So it can be a Star Trek, it can be whatever your version of a vampire show is. Don't write me on vampire shows. I really just had a pattern with a vampire. But yeah, so it's not a matter of branding, so especially early on, it's just making a key that will fit a lock, right? And you write your passion, as Paul says, and the passion will define your characters, and also, ironically, start to get you towards your real voice, whatever that is, which is part of why they're hired. There's a flavor. You know, Paul talks about not being geeky enough for the room, but the room that we were in, at least at Leverage, certainly was, everybody was geeky about something. So the conversation would shift to areas I don't like.
Oh, I can geek out on stuff, just not geek stuff.
Right, so then you geek out on like bike rallies and European.
You want to talk about cycling or European football? Or
I was just like, okay, you know, but from Paul's point of view, when we start talking too deeply about, 1970s comic book runs of the Avengers, he's like, okay, so, but the whole room is the personality, the whole room is the brain, right? You want a lot of different flavors, so it's just best ways to dig into what your flavor is, because somebody's gonna like it.
There's an apocryphal story around Hollywood, and I spoke to somebody a couple years ago and found out that it's most of it actually true. There was a writer that had never written in television and ended up getting hired on, I think it was The Shield, back in the day, off of a Gilligan's Island spec.
Yeah.
Because what they had done is they had taken Gilligan's Island. They had taken the setting and the characters, and they had turned it into this dark, twisted murder mystery, where somebody had murdered. And I don't know which character it was, but it was just like this writer was like, "That's what I want to write." You know, how many agents and contest people would say, "Don't. That's a waste of time to write that." And this person ended up having a writing career off of that because it was so out there, but it was so original. It was so unique. It was that, wow, this person can write. If they can turn a Gilligan's Island episode into this dark, twisted murder mystery, hell yeah, they can write a Shield.
But it wasn't a stunt.
No, it was like they just wanted to do it. They weren't doing it like, oh, this will get me. Like, they had no idea. It was just this crazy thing they had written. And it wasn't even like submitted by an agent or something. It was, you started hearing about the script. Like, oh, did you read the script? Did you hear this about the script? It got passed around, That's what the blacklist used to do. Yeah. And that's what it's about.
Yeah.
What was the other, whose question do we miss?
Somebody didn't get a question.
Oh, you're,
Yes.
managers versus agents.
And a similar question.
And the agent thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Managers versus agent, we both have managers and agents.
Yeah, well, these guys, how do I say this? I just left my long-term agent, and it was a really hugely emotional decision for me. But the basic rule of thumb is your managers stick around and agents come and go. I didn't play it that way, but that's the normal rule. The managers sort of looking at your overall career and where do you want to be in 5 years and all that kind of stuff. And agents are helpful in that regard, but they're largely dealing with the now. And a manager should be thinking next year, agents basically thinking next month a lot of the time, at least starting out, certainly, because they don't know you as a commodity and you have no footprint, so there's no options really.
I think a manager, for people that want to go down the representation route before they, this whole thing about how do you get an agent, stuff like I said, that I'll talk to in a minute. No agent ever helped any writer get their first gig. Managers are a different thing. I talk to my manager minimum 3 or 4 times a week. I'll go weeks and weeks without ever talking to my agents. My agents are like my lawyer. They're business people. They call me when they have a meeting for me or when there's a business thing happening. My manager also sets meetings and does things for me, but my manager also manages my career and my life. My manager helped me through my divorce. My manager knows all my personal stuff. My manager is the one that I can fire off an email to when I find out this writer's making more money than I am, and blah, 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 how come that happened? I don't do that to my agents. My agents don't want to hear it. They're agents and they're dealing, they're agenting in Hollywood. They come in the door and they are immediately in 4th gear at 90 miles an hour all day long. Your manager is there to do that part of the job, but also to manage you. I can talk to my manager about my agents. My manager, it's funny. I was with an agency who, I said, I was talking about managers, like, yeah, we know some managers if you want a manager. I said, I think I might like a manager, because at the time I was feeling kind of funky about my agent. So they set me up with a couple of meetings. I went around, I met some managers. I chose this guy I went with. First thing that manager did for me, he's like, all right, you need a new agent. But I'm not kidding. That's his job. And it was the agent that got me the meeting with the manager. But the manager was like, you should be farther along in your career. This agency is not serving you properly. We think you would be better here. I'd still be with that agent today.
But you could be so focused on the agent front, like I gotta get an agent, that you can neglect a lot of other stuff. And the fact is, as Paul says, you can have a low end everything. You can have a low end manager, a low end agent. You get the job, get the right job, then you just call up and say, look, I'm unhappy with my representation. I'm currently on, show X. Can I get a meeting with you guys? And they'll take it because you're already employed. So somebody else likes you, therefore you must be likable. Sure. But I wouldn't get too bogged down in the running around for that. I spent years. One day there will be a story of it where I was my own agent and manager. Listen to Hilliard's. We talk about that on Monday on his podcast, but I did all kinds of crazy Rube Goldberg crap to get my scripts across. And at the end of the day, what happened was a guy said, who's that lunatic that got you this meeting? And I could tell him who it was. And he's like, he's not an agent, he's not a manager. Some studio exec basically said, let me think about this, and hooked me up with my agent, and I had that agent for 10 years.
So what was your agent question?
Kind of that was it.
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned how an agent never gets your first job. So.
Yeah, here's the thing. Everybody wants agents, and look, I love my agent, and I just did a whole thing about how hard they work. I will say agents are inherently lazy because they're living off the accomplishments of other people, okay? Now that doesn't mean, look, I could never be an agent, and my agents bust their asses, I'm sure most agents in Hollywood do. But that's the thing, and so to that, if you're an agent and you're busting your ass every day trying to get your writers with credits a job or even read, why are you gonna take on somebody with no credits at all and have to work twice as much hard to get somebody to read? Because here's the thing, when agent submits a script, it's not just like agent just submits it. They have to get permission to submit you to a show or a producer. They have to call up and pitch you. Well, what's he or she worked on? Well, they've done this show, this show, this show. Okay, send me over their stuff. Okay? If the agent calls them and goes, I've never worked on anything, it's a brand new, writer, but they're so amazing, you gotta read them. So maybe the producer or network or studio will say yes, but a lot of times they're gonna look at the pile of scripts on their desk and they're gonna go, I don't have time to read somebody that's brand new. My first job, I told you how I got my first 2 gigs, had nothing to do with agents. I don't know, Jeff told you his, I don't know, I have never met a screenwriter, and I know a lot of people in the business who ever told me they got their first job from an agent or because of an agent. Almost always, it was a connection, it was a happenstance, it was the right time, the right place, a producer needed something, their script got into the hands of the right person, whatever. And then the agents come out of the woodwork. Because when you are a working writer, it's that much easier to sell you.
Right.
And so it's this whole thing about, I so many aspiring writers worry about query letters and do this and get representation, and that's the only way to get work. It's BS. The way to get work is be a good writer. Because I don't believe, well, I will say that there's probably a lot of amazing actors in Hollywood that are undiscovered. I don't think there's that many amazing writers that are undiscovered. Because there's just this weird thing that good writing finds a home. It just is. It just does.
The other thing about the agent hunt is about, you mentioned query letters, and I was like, people still write those? But that comes from book world more so than our end. Like,
and it's what you're taught at these seminars you pay for.
But
how to write a great query letter.
But it's kind of legit.
How to pitch.
It's kind of legit if you live in Nebraska and you want a literary agent in New York and you're not going to be able to move to New York. You send out the query letter and all this kind of shit.
But
that doesn't work for screenwriters. You're going to have to show up for the meeting if nothing else. So throw that out. But the thing too, like I had been in development for projects because a friend said, oh, do you know about this open door or whatever? I had shows in development 3 times before I had an agent or a manager, just because some guy, it wasn't even like a handshake hookup, it was simply, I know about something, now you know about it. And that was it. You could go find the phone number and anyone could have done it, except my friend found it first and passed it on to me. And and then it's the quality of your work or what they're looking, combined with what they're looking for at the time, that gets
and it still even happens once you're in and have an agent. I mean, I got my first 2 gigs, nothing to do with an agent. Then the next 2 or 3 things I did was because of my agent. Then I got Judging Amy, which at the time was arguably my biggest thing, and I spent 3 years on that show, became a producer on it. My agent didn't give me that gig. That was because somebody on Judging Amy had worked on another show before and knew somebody that knew me, and they read my script and said, Barbara Hall would like this script, send it to Barbara Hall, or call my agent and said, you should send this script to Barbara Hall. And that's how it happened, Now that said, Leverage, which was a great gig and kind of helped change my career around when I was kind of in a bad place, happened because of my manager. The agent that I left, who got me the manager, I contacted them. I said, I really think that show Leverage. I think I'd be right for it. I heard they're hiring. My agent was like, yeah, they've already hired everyone. They're not hiring anybody. And I was like, okay, right. My agent tells me that. So working legit Hollywood agent. So then I got this manager. Manager sits down, my first meeting, what do you want to do? I said, well, blah, blah, blah. And I show like Leverage is the kind of thing I'd love to write. Oh, really? Okay. And I said, yeah, but I checked my agent, said they're not hiring anymore. My manager goes, really? Well, I'll look into that. if my manager looked in, sure enough, they were hiring, and I got the gig, fired the agent.
Okay, you get everybody?
All right, thanks for coming out.
So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you to both of you again. How many people are interested in hearing about the space afterwards?
It's a great space, guys.
Okay.
You should really.
I'm just really quickly going to tell you where everything is because I know from experience it's going to take about 20 minutes for everybody. It's a workspace for writers. We provide everything that you need: Wi-Fi, free tea and coffee, communal kitchen, snacks on the honor system, etc. That room is the library. It's silent. This room is the quiet room. It's quiet. That's the conference room. It's a continuation of the workspace. It doesn't have a sound level designator. We run free classes there. Every week we run a couple of classes. If any of you are interested in getting more of a screenwriting class together, or you guys, I don't know. I'm not a screenwriter, so that's not my deal, but we're super into supporting community, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sorry.
No, take it.
What would be really cool if you can find Hatchery Press on Twitter or just talk to her or find the email and contact. If you guys have, like, you know what, I'd like a class or a seminar on this, on the craft side of it, on a particular part of structure or a particular part of the writing process or something, contact Talia, contact the Hatchery and find out. And Jeff and I and other people, when we told some of our screenwriter friends that we were doing this, they were like, hell yeah, I'll do it too. I mean, we want to give as much as we can back, and so let her know what kind of stuff you guys are looking for. Like I said, this was very freeform this time. We wanted it to be a Q&A just to make sure everyone who had specific questions got answered. I hope that happened, but if not, I mean, contact her, contact us on Twitter. That's the other thing. If anybody who is on Twitter, it'd be great if you kind of gave a shout out about this, even if you hated it. I mean, put it on Twitter and go, those guys suck. That was a waste of my afternoon. But however you feel, put it out there on Twitter. Get the word out that this stuff's happening.
Because you guys want to keep doing it.
Yeah, we'd love to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
We'd love to.
absolutely. So, at the Hatchery, we want to facilitate that happening, and the only way we can do that is to gauge interest, gauge what kind of interest it is. You can sign up on the mailing list there, or just email me directly, and I'll kind of get everybody together and figure out what that is. So yeah, I think, yes. Oh, there's a deck. It's really nice. There's no smoking.
Oh, it's great.
There's a deck. It's really
I
great.
recommend going and looking at that alone makes you want to come here.
Probably the first one or second person up there can get some strawberries growing, and then we'll be done. But yeah, we do free day passes, and definitely just hit me up. We're really responsive. People are so into contributing to a community that they feel resonant with and they feel ownership of, and that's what we have here. So again, you just talk to us, we'll figure something out, and thank you all for coming out.
Yeah, I'm going to say one more thing.
That's my office, it's the only office. I've got a cat that comes in about once a week, but there's no problem with that.
The cat is really good at dialogue. The other thing is
That's
look,
why we sing.
writing is nice. Nicely done.
Try to be a hero.
Professional writer. Writing is an inherently lonely business. You're sitting by yourself at the computer. Even if you have a writing partner, it's lonely for the both of you, or sometimes you're not even in the same room. Having a community of people that know the pain you're going through is great, and it's so good for your soul and your heart and your enthusiasm and your motivation. That's why, like, writing groups are a great thing, but like I said, you just gotta find the right group. So you find an environment like this, writers I find are much more communal than actors, directors, stuntmen, anything, cyclists, it's soccer players, it's writing, we're all in the same boat, whether you're getting paid, 8 figures a year or whether you're working at Starbucks. We have a connection.
Yeah.
And so if you can, the more time you spend around other writers, I absolutely think helps your writing. And So I can't recommend places like this and go into things like this enough. Just don't pay people for money.
We already.
Except for the membership, we gotta come around.
Oh yeah, no, pay for this place, don't pay.
We don't need to talk. We are each other's mentors,
Yeah, that's absolutely it.
right? We have to be.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can I have a water bottle? Grab a cup and the filter, the fridge filters water.
Thank you.
I'm a novel. Yeah, so I was reading.
Was that season? No, I ended up marrying somebody
Come with me.
down there.
I just want to stop the block and say hi.